All right, we've got a Hunter M779. You do have to be 18 or older. So make sure you're 18 or older before requesting the box. What's up, Hunter?
Hello. I'm
Hey, you
18.
18 or older?
I'm 18.
Cool. All right, good stuff. What's your argument for hunting being part of conservation?
Actually, that's kind of funny that I came across this live because I am currently hunting right now. So,
Okay.
hunting is conservation, and this is my argument. So, 2.1 million deers a year get hit by cars. And 440 of them people sadly lose their lives. And me as a hunter, I've seen it more as an impact because I don't shoot everything that I see. I'm not one of them hunters. I go for strictly like big game animals, sometimes small game, because I'm hunting for like squirrel right now. And the problem with deer is if you get into livestock and like stuff like that,
Deer get into livestock?
not just that. I mean, not livestock. I'm so sorry. Completely butchered that. Agriculture. I've been speaking to multiple people today, so
No, you're good,
I'm
man.
all
No
over.
worries. Yeah, no worries. So
Um.
let me address. So
So yeah.
it sounds like your first argument is that hunting is conservation for population control of species like deer. Is that kind of your first argument you'd like to discuss?
Yes, sir.
Cool. Okay. So if we're going to talk about population control, I think we first need to look at land management practices. So hunting funding through the Pittman-Robertson Act, most of the funds, it's 11% tax. You're probably familiar with this, tax on hunting goods and some services as well. So it's 11% tax. It contributes about $1 billion a year. Which is a small portion of the overall conservation funding, including land, water, and soil conservation for public funding. But if we're talking about conservation for population control, we need to look at what some of those tax dollars or taxes from the Pittman-Robertson Act go towards. And a lot of those taxes go towards the land management to increase these deer populations for you, a hunter. So to argue that hunting is conservation for population control, while also not acknowledging that land management practices are also being implemented to increase those populations for hunting, is kind of a contradiction. Do you see that?
Yes, I see your point.
Okay. So then we can say that conservation is not, or hunting is not part of conservation through that contradiction, because the argument for population control is not a solid argument, because hunters are also contributing to increasing the population control for exploitation of those animals. So do you have another argument for why you think hunting should be considered conservation?
Yes, instead of deer, which we were just got to untouched on, what about squirrels? Because they do use in some wires, it is a proven fact that some of them do use some kind of like nuts or like tree nuts for like the oil of, the wiring and like the plastic slash rubber of it. And what squirrels do is they will get inside your house, anything. And I've seen multiple people with this because I also do pest control too. I try to help people with pest control. And they'll get in their cars and stuff. My dad's boss actually just got a squirrel under his like truck bed, and it chewed all the wires out from under the front truck. They've watched it run in and out of the truck too, and they've tried to get rid of it and everything. It won't go anywhere, and it kept coming back until they had to kill it. So that is another statement I want to make.
So is your argument now
Is
for
property damage.
conservation that to protect from like pests, you're considering certain animals pests, so you think that hunting those pests that you determine as pests can help to decrease the impacts like economically on like humans?
I wouldn't say like economically. I would just say like safety, because with squirrels chewing wires, and not just that. I mean, obviously, like cars and stuff get hit by fucking deer and moose all the time. Because like I live in Kentucky and I live like relatively close to a city, and I drive down the highway And I bet you I could drive down the highway right now and see 40 deer dead.
So I would like to kind of, remind you that a lot of those issues with the populations of these animals are from hunting's contributions, right, through the land management practices and the focus on these game species, right? So I don't think, if you do want to talk about deer and elk again, we can talk about that, but I've kind of already shown you the contradiction in that argument. So if we do want to reduce those animals' populations, we need to consider the land management practices that we're doing for hunters, in order to be able to exploit that wildlife. But back to the like squirrels and pests, if a small amount of like property damage or safety issues are encountered from wildlife, would you rather there be like no wildlife that ever have impacts on humans? Like I find it really hard like to see an argument for pests, because there are ways to like protect against pests, like rodents or squirrels chewing on wires. Like there's ways to properly protect wires. We could better engineer our cars so that wildlife, don't get into those certain areas, like where the battery, would have some wiring. So there's ways around that, rather than just hunting. But hunting also oftentimes increases these populations because you're reducing the competition within ecosystems. So by taking out a small amount of squirrels, you're actually reducing the competition in those breeding populations, and that actually can help increase the populations for the next season. So by hunting, you're actually doing a disservice to pest management.
I find that really hard to believe because, like we were talking about pests and stuff, hunting, as I said, try to help a population control. It doesn't fully help with population control because squirrels reproduce year round. Okay, they
Well,
are just like
I don't
humans,
think that's true. So
and
there is a breeding season for squirrels. We actually do wildlife rehabilitation, so there is a
maybe.
breeding season for squirrels where they're mostly, having and raising their young. So that's not entirely true. And again, like we've already addressed population. So like if you keep coming back to these like
Yeah.
arguments we've already addressed, I'm probably just going to move on. But my argument is that we could either try better to protect against pests in nonviolent ways of engineering and design, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, which you're closer to, is trying to eradicate these pests and manage them through violent means. So we have nonviolent solutions, and you're arguing for a violent solution, despite there being alternatives.
I'm I'm sorry, but them non-violent solutions are highly expensive. I prefer a 20 gauge, and that's it. It does perfectly good for a squirrel. An $80 box of 20 gauge get me through 50 squirrels.
Okay, so when you make claims like it's expensive or that it doesn't work, you need to back those claims with evidence. So if you don't have evidence, but you're going to continue making like broad claims like this, I'll probably just move on to the next guest, because I do want to have like good faith debates where people actually present evidence and not just make claims. So do you have any evidence to
I
show
got
that
evidence.
the nonviolent solutions do not work or are too expensive?
Yes, I actually do have evidence.
Okay, what's your
So,
scientific
I have
source?
my friend. Okay, so a friend of
Did you
mine.
just say
Okay, and this
so?
is
It
completely
sounds like
true.
you're going
I
to provide
don't
an
sugarcoat.
anecdote. Are you familiar with anecdotes being like the lowest tier of scientific evidence, or of the hierarchy of evidence? Like anecdotes, like I could say something like, "Well, I actually handle the squirrel population really easily through just picking up all the acorns for an hour every year." And it's like, okay, well, I just disproved you with an anecdote, right? So I'm not really interested in anecdotes. I'm looking for like scientific evidence, or a peer-reviewed article, or some sort of publication. I'm not really interested in anecdotes.
Okay, look how. Okay, what I want you to do right now is go to Kentucky Fish and Wildlife. And there could be, I'm not 100% positive, but there should be a statistic on how hard or easy it is to trap a squirrel, raccoon. Raccoons are actually relatively easy because I trap them. But squirrels, on the other hand, they are really intelligent creatures when it comes to, traps and stuff. The same as groundhogs, because groundhogs, they don't get trapped because they are very docile. They're
But again,
stupid,
like
but they're
that,
docile.
I appreciate that you like might be familiar with, some specific article in Kentucky, but what you're citing is an article on a Department of Natural Resources website. So that's kind of a biased source because the Department of Natural Resources relies on hunting funding, for that. So that's kind of like me saying like, oh, the vegan diet is best because the Vegan Society published this article about it, right? So like that's not really solid. But if you want to go find your evidence, I do have a lot of guests kind of waiting. So we've been through a few different arguments, and I pointed out your contradictions. But if you do want to come back and provide some evidence, to talk about the pest debate, I'd be more than
Hey,
happy to
Officer
do so.
Smalls just dropped the thing. Yes, but do you, also one more question from me is: do you hunt? Like, do you hunt?
So I
You
was
hunt?
a hunter for the first 26 years of my life. But as I learned about the lack of necessity for consuming meat and animal products, and actually the health detriment that those products have, the more I looked into the science behind like ecology as well, and hunting's impact on ecosystems, and the more I learned that hunting actually has negative impacts on biodiversity. So that's when I really started to question it and look into it more. So through that education, I really, started to kind of be like, maybe I shouldn't be a hunter. And then I also began to empathize with the individuals. I was a rabbit hunter, but then I met a domestic rabbit and she was really chill. She reminded me of like my dog and my cat. And she had a little personality, and had, unique things about her. And I realized that I was inflicting unnecessary violence on these animals, for something that was not only bad for me, but also bad for the ecosystem. So that's why I quit hunting.
I see where you're coming from, but I also don't. Because the domesticated rabbit is completely different than wild rabbit. I can tell you right now, if you pick up a wild rabbit, it will chew the shit out of you. It will tear you another asshole.
All right,
There
Hunter,
is
I'm going
no
to go
way
ahead
you're
and move
gonna.
on. I'll be happy to respond to your claim about them being different. You're right. Domestic rabbits are very different from wild rabbits. That's very right. The word domestic indicates their difference. Domestic rabbits have been bred over time by humans, right? So when we rescue rabbits from places like hoarding cases or meat rabbits that are being intended for slaughter, these rabbits are a lot different than wild rabbits, and they do have different instincts, than wild rabbits. But that does not change their individuality or their inherent value as individuals. So yeah, sorry about that, Hunter. But if you want to come back sometime and bring some evidence to discuss, I'm more than happy to discuss with you again. Let's see, we got a few folks in the queue. Let's see, Ivan. Let's see what you got going on, man. How you doing, Ivan?
I'm good.
Cool. What's your thoughts on the topic here? Hunting is not conservation.
Well, I guess I'll start with I'm a hunter. I'm not a big fan of the DNR aspect of it. Earlier in that debate that you were just having, I guess I disagree with where you're saying harvesting animals increases more. In the area that we have grew up and hunted in, over the years, we have seen a decline in deer, and that was because most hunters in this area feel that the DNR gave out too many tags to, let's say, get antlerless does, and pretty much has wiped the deer herd out. I know I get your side. I've came across animals that are friendly and nice, make you question sometimes. I hunt for meat. I'm not a vegetarian. I don't think I ever could be, though.
So, kind of trying to get back to the topic here, though. I appreciate your backstory and kind of insight into your understandings here. But why do you think hunting is conservation? Because what you've just described is actually how hunting through mismanagement can actually be detrimental to wildlife. So you've
Well,
kind of like made an argument
and
for me.
I guess I don't really know your background enough, so I'm not trying to argue with you or debate it. Are you going to the conservation part of the DNR side of it, or just as hunters in general, how they look at it?
Yeah, so I'll be happy to kind of lay out my position here. So I believe that hunting is not conservation. Initially, we can say that hunting, just by its definition, is the exploitation of wildlife, right? You're killing an animal in the wild in order for you to make use of it. So that's like exploitation of a wild animal. So that has impacts to the ecosystems. So just by definition, it is the opposite of conservation. Conservation is protection or, preserving ecosystems. So by definition, hunting is not conservation. And there's also a lot of scientific evidence to show that hunting has detrimental impacts to ecosystems, mostly in biodiversity. Through the North American model, we focused a lot on species of animals that hunters want to exploit, like deer, elk, as well as even some predators for exploitation. And that has had negative impacts to biodiversity because a lot of that funding that we're putting into conservation for wildlife is going to hunter purposes, right? And for land management for hunting, as well as for, regulations for hunting to make sure that hunters aren't overexploiting, like you mentioned in your state. So I would argue, for all of those reasons, hunting is not conservation.
And I guess I can't disagree with you either. I think there's a major impact, but I do believe that it should be better managed. I do believe that it does hurt the ecosystem if there's way too many that are being harvested.
Can I ask you though, Ivan, like, are you familiar with like nonviolent or non-hunting related forms of conservation, like non-interventionalist, practices?
I guess I don't understand or know what you're talking of.
Yeah, so, if we look at ecology, there's quite a few different means of natural population control inside of ecosystems, right? So we have like predation, we have carrying capacity of ecosystems, which is essentially how much food is there for these animals. We have competition, throughout herbivores or throughout predators or mesopredators. We have disease, we have parasites. There's so many different natural ways for populations to be controlled naturally. So if we kind of lean into those, mechanisms and let nature, in a lot of senses, do what it does best, we can manage these populations naturally without human involvement. Because historically, if we look at how hunting has impacted ecosystems, we see that hunting has a negative impact on a lot of different things inside of ecosystem through overexploitation, as well as the focus on these prey species, to the detriment of a lot of other species like songbirds, and other fish that aren't, for fishing. So we've lost a lot of species because we've focused on the interest of hunters rather than the interest of the broader ecosystem.
Yeah, and I at the same time, even though I am a hunter, I don't disagree in a way. And the problem, some of it is, I believe the human population has increased way more than it should, where mankind, there was many resources at one point in time for man to harvest, wildlife. Now I do believe there is a point to where it's being over-harvested, and it is causing ecosystem problem, but there's many other factors that I believe take place with that too, with pollution and so forth. But
and land
so I guess not someone I can really argue with too much. I may have a little bit of a different belief on it, or a vegetarian, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming up, man, and having the discussion. And I hope you'll look into maybe some of the nonviolent ways to manage, wildlife. Maybe look into some of the different ecological mechanisms that I mentioned, about like carrying capacity and predators. There's like reintroductions of predators that we could do in less human populated areas. And there's also like sterilization programs in areas where there's really high populations of things like deer, or even problem species that, could be considered pests in urban or suburban areas. We could also do sterilization rather than, encouraging people to go out and be violent against wildlife. We can encourage, the future generations to take nonviolent means of, helping these ecosystems rather than exploiting them.
I guess, and that's one thing I guess I disagree with. I don't see me hunting being violent. And it's a lot of my background too. I'm native, so
Well, I was a hunter too, Ivan. So I'm familiar why hunters might overlook the violence that happens when you're hunting. And I definitely get that. But really, that's a lot of cognitive dissonance. You're not wanting to recognize the violence, and especially when it's unnecessary, right? Like when you go out and you hunt, but then the next few days you go to the store and you just like maybe even buy meat, or you buy your vegetables from the grocery store. We have these modern conveniences, and we have agriculture where we can grow enough plants to feed the entire world's population. But unfortunately, most of the ag land that we have is devoted towards animal agriculture. So not only is it kind of contradictory to be a conservationist and eat meat, but it's also contradiction to go out and hunt if you care about the dwindling wildlife and our biodiversity crisis. Like I mentioned, the hunting impact on biodiversity is pretty significant. So I'd really encourage you to look into some of those things, like the biodiversity crisis, and how we could maybe manage that through a shift to a plant-based food system. But yeah, I think overlooking the individuals that you are being violent with, again, I definitely understand why you would not want to see the violence, but there's no non-violent way to take a life unnecessarily, and I hope you could agree to that.
I'm sorry, you're in and out a lot there. I don't know if it's from when you're moving from your speaker or not. But you brought up like going to the meat. I'm sorry, what was that?
You're actually showing some bars, like you're losing signal here. So everything's coming clear for me, but I think your service might be dropping in and out.
That could be possible. You were mentioning about going to the store and purchasing meat or whatnot, and I guess that's some hunters are different. And I agree, some are like that, and if you want to call them hunters or only go out for big racks and whatnot. Whereas I'm a different kind of. I feel like I'm a different from most. I avoid buying processed foods from stores. I avoid buying any veggies from stores. I'm not big into big franchise or corporations. Again, a lot of it I think comes from me being native and my background. But when it comes down to also, you're talking about non-violent, and you could go purchase, let's say, beef or chicken. There's still a violent way of, if you want to consider it violent, then of taking that animal's life. And the difference, I look at my animal's life from livestock. My deer that I harvest got to live a free-range life. There was no injections. There was no being caged up, walking in their own piss and shit all day. I feel like...
Ivan, I feel like you're kind of setting up a false dichotomy here. So, you could go to the grocery store and choose plant-based options. You could also go to farmers markets and support local farmers who are ethically farming. Again, there's no non-violent way to take a life when you don't need to, and we don't need to be consuming animal products. It's not between the deer or the chicken from the grocery store. It's between the deer and the chicken or plant-based options, right? And like it sounds like maybe you have skills, like you could grow a garden, like I do. I also sell food. Yeah, so I also sell at a farmer's market. So we grow a lot of our food, but we do still go to the grocery store. But when we go to the grocery store, we choose cruelty-free options that didn't involve the exploitation of a sentient life, like the killing of a chicken or a cow. And you can get all the nutrients you need from a plant-based diet, and you can avoid, the ethical issues with unaliving animals.
I guess, and I never did enough research to know this part of it, but to argue that debate a little bit, my best friend's wife was nursing, had a baby, and she was actually struggling to produce enough milk and provide for the baby. And from what they had gathered from the doctors, because she was vegan, she needed to increase her protein, and she pretty much, she either got it from meat or tried to, I don't know how you want to call it, powdered proteins and things like that to add, which now she's back to eating meat to provide for her baby. So there must not be enough source in there to just be vegans.
Yeah, so Ivan, this is an anecdote, and it does sound like a difficult situation for this individual you're speaking about. But plants do have protein, and actually, all of the protein, all of the essential amino acids, which are proteins that you need, are found in plants. So if you eat a diversified plant-based diet, specifically plants like whole food plant-based diet, you can get all of the nutrients you need. You can look at the American Dietetics Association as well as the British Dietetic Associations, and they do say that all stages of life, including pregnancy and infancy, a vegan diet is adequate. So I appreciate you coming up, Ivan, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next guest because you have shared a few kind of misinformation things, but I appreciate you coming up, Ivan. All right, let's see who's next here. Oh, we've got Hunt Detail. I've actually had some discussions in my comments with Hunt Detail. We'll see what he has to say today. Hey, what's up? Can I call you Hunt, or would you prefer a different name?
Hey, Ben, how you doing, brother? My name's Jacob. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, all good, Jacob.
I've actually never done this before, so but I appreciate our conversations on some of your posts and I know obviously we're going to agree to disagree on pretty much everything, but I did want to ask you. So because I just to understand you more. So Hunt Detail, like my whole feed is about hunting. That's it's something that's really important to me. It's close to me. It's something that I enjoy, and I'll argue that I understand wildlife better than you, more than you, because I'm closer to it. Like I'm closer to the deer. I'm closer to the elk. I'm more interested in understanding their nuance and their behavior than you will ever know. And I care about those populations flourishing, quite honestly.
Okay.
And
so can I stop you?
no, hold on. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
That's a wild claim. So first off, you don't know my involvement on my land. I mean, I do manage over 100 acres of property where we are rewilding and building habitat for animals, and we're tracking these animals. But the only difference between you and me, perhaps there's some age difference and stuff like that, but our only difference is that I choose not to violently kill these animals. Right. And your argument is that because you kill these animals, you have a better connection to them. But I would argue that's less of a connection. That's actually a disconnection between the individuals, because I actually respect these individuals and I want to see them flourish, and I want to see them live their entire lives, in nature rather than me extracting them from nature. So I think that's a little dishonest to say that you know more than somebody when you've never actually met me or seen my farm or, seen our operation. I understand you probably get a lot, that you assume from some of my posts, that you follow, but I mean, that's kind of a frustrating and disingenuous claim to make.
Well, I mean, we're not going to argue whether it's true or not, but ultimately I care. I want to see deer, turkey, elk flourish. And then as a result, as a function of that, when they have wild places to live and habitat that allows them to live, because let's be honest, Ben, you and I have encroached on their habitat. Every suburban sprawl, cities, people, new building complexes, new strip malls, all that garbage is taking away their habitat, right? And I hate that. I don't like it. I want to see wild animals flourish because I appreciate and love wild places. And so
can I ask you if you want to see them flourish, why do you also want to unalive them?
Because I hunted. There was a time when I hunted when I was younger because my family did it, and I stepped away from it because there were some things that I saw that I didn't like. I felt like it was ugly. And yeah. I'll share with you an example. And I think this is good that you and I are having this conversation so that when we do different posts back and forth, we can understand each other more. Because there are times where I feel like you make claims that are sort of broad brush with hunters, and I don't know if you actually know what you're talking about. But
yeah, so I mean, if I can tell you about
no. Let me tell my story here, and then you can jump in.
Go ahead.
So I heard earlier that you said you used to hunt. I get that, but so I killed a buck, took it to a meat processor. They cut it into 5 pieces right in front of me, and I just thought, man, I took something of beauty and made it ugly, right? And I had a real hard time with that. And then I came to the realization and the understanding that when I was much older, probably 15, 20 years later, that if I'm going to continue to consume meat, I cannot just purchase it from a grocery store and have no connection to where my food comes from. I don't think
Yep.
it's fair to hire that out, to hire a killer at the grocery store for my meat. But I knew that I wanted to consume meat. I have canines. I have a single chambered stomach. I don't have a multi-chamber stomach like a cow does in terms of just eating, as an herbivore. And so for me, I'm designed to eat meat and I want to be closer to that process. And so I don't want to, while it's ugly when a deer gets hit on a highway, or it's ugly when a deer dies of disease, or a deer is stabbed by another deer, during the rut and it dies of infection. That's ugly. We hate that. But if I can kill a mature deer, something that's been on the landscape for a while, and make room for new fawns because there are limited resources because of human encroachment, then I will do that and I will consume that deer and I'll share it with my friends and share it with my family. So I know you don't like that process, but I want to see wild game flourish and wild places flourish. And I know that that's hard to understand, but
No, I think it's a contradiction, Jacob. So, you're saying you want to see them flourish, but then you want to take their lives. And
that's right.
I would
Yeah, you're
ask you,
absolutely right.
you made some kind of claims there. So you mentioned you take your deer to a processor. Have you ever actually butchered one yourself?
I do it now all the time. That's the only way I do it. I grind my own
Okay.
meat. I kill elk. I kill deer, and I process it by hand.
And
And
I do have more respect for you doing that and putting up with that process than people who ignore that process and either take their animals to a butcher or, don't even do hunting and go to the store and ignore all of that, right? But it still doesn't justify taking that animal. And you made a claim about design. Perhaps you're religious and you do believe in a designer, but I would say if you look at the scientific evidence, high meat consumption or even just any sort of meat consumption is contributing to increased risk of heart disease, atherosclerosis, which is also related to heart disease, and artery clogs. You're increasing your chances of obesity. You're also increasing your chances of various types of cancer. So if you're saying we're designed to eat meat, then why would this diet, including meat, be correlated with negative health outcomes when a vegan or plant-based diet is correlated to positive outcomes and longer longevity?
yeah, I'm not going to get into that data on that particular study. I know that there was a lot of over processed meats that were included in that, but no,
No, these are meta-analyses, so they're looking at various studies. Even like Mediterranean diets are associated, where there's just like lamb or a very specific high quality meat. So, this is across the board, and this is scientific evidence. So, like, I appreciate you coming up, but like, I don't really want to platform people who are spreading disinformation.
Well,
And
how
to
about
me,
this?
like,
How about this?
that's
Are you
kind of,
familiar with the data that's coming out with people with epilepsy and having a carnivore diet, how it reduces seizures? Are you familiar with the
no,
data
do
that
you
with
have a
patients
study?
with people with schizophrenia that
So do
are
you have any
having
studies that
better
you could
mental
comment
health
on
outcomes
that,
because of a
Jacob?
carnivore diet?
Yeah, Jacob. So I know we've had comments before where I asked you like for scientific evidence, and I probably sent you a few different studies to review, but you haven't yet like sent me any studies, and I'd really appreciate it
Oh,
if
I
you
sent
did,
you some just
because
recently on your comments about coyotes and their population. So
I,
I
I
sent
think
those
that was
links.
a link to an article, though, was it not?
One was a study and one was an article. Yeah, and then
Okay,
I'm
I'll go
curious,
back and
Ben.
look, but yeah,
Why
if
do
you
you
can send
not
me the stuff
trust the
on.
scientists, the biologists that are scientists at each state? You don't trust their review of the health of habitat for each respective state?
Well, I think in the same
Biologists.
way that maybe you have a confirmation bias on hunting, right, where you don't want to see evidence against hunting or meat consumption, a lot of people go into wildlife management or conservation fields, and they already have this, bias towards hunting, right? And so they're not really going to seek out information that changes their perspective because they have cultural appeals, or traditional
Sounds
appeals.
like you're making excuses there, Ben. I'm sorry. You're
Okay,
like
well,
so
Jacob,
they're
I appreciate you coming up, man, but like you're literally just like rejecting any like stuff that I put forward, and you have
and
yet to like.
likewise, you're doing the
Well,
same
you've
with
made
me.
some claims. You've made some claims, and you've yet to like actually share any data. Like, there's no evidence that a carnivore diet is beneficial in any way, except if you consider benefits of increased risk of heart disease, of obesity, and other cancers. But if you do want to share that study, I'd be more than happy to review it with you. But I don't remember seeing an actual study for the coyote stuff that you shared. But yeah, I'd be happy to look at anything you want to share, Jacob. But I do have like quite a few guests in the queue here, and I really do appreciate you coming up. But I just don't really feel comfortable platforming you if you want to keep sharing like misinformation about
Well,
dangerous things.
Let's be clear. You're the one sharing misinformation here. So,
Okay.
hey, have a great
All right,
day.
Jacob.
Bye-bye.
Yep, you too, Dad. Oh, I didn't know you could go full screen on the chat. That's kind of cool. I'll go ahead and kick you for you, Jacob, since it's your first time. Yeah, me and Jacob have had some back and forth in the comments on some of the hunt videos for a while, so I'm glad I got to talk to him, but he does have a lot of like really broad claims with no actual scientific evidence, which is kind of frustrating. Hey, an ally.
Hi, I've been offline for a while.
Yeah, I know. I've noticed you've been missing.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
I took a 2-week break, but I missed Jacob. I would have loved to engage with him one-on-one. And if he's still listening, for the hunters that are listening, and Ben is such a great advocate of moving differently in terms of masculinity in this country, in terms of how we can embrace kindness and compassion for animals, for our health, and for our planet. He is a perfect example of setting up a different model of behavior. Just for everyone who understands, so they know my history, I work in the New York City area for animal legislation. I've been meat-free. I'm turning 57. I've been meat-free for over 46 years, vegan for 20. And I have a pharma background. So I come to this conversation listening to some of the comments, with some knowledge about science and health and so on and so forth. And I feel bad, Ben, because like you handled it really well. And I think, you both had a great exchange. Fair. Definitely neither one of you are going to see eye to eye on that situation. But the sad part is that unfortunately in North America, specifically Canada and the United States, men do not hunt out of necessity. It is a myth that has been built around so many issues in the United States, also in conjunction with guns in the United States, that, unfortunately, they're not willing to listen to that because they feel, and I hear what they're saying, because I'm pro Second Amendment. I don't want to take anyone's guns away, but there is something when people hear you want to remove this, you can't, it's somehow we're removing your right. And we're not discussing that. We're talking about the moral and ethical implications, regardless of what studies on both sides have been fed to either subject, of whether or not we can do things differently, which we can. And it's, whether or not you want to have open dialogue. So you did a great job.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I've been wanting to have an actual conversation with him for a while because we go back on and forth. And, I have asked him for some sources, and maybe he did share the coyote stuff. So I'll have to go look for that. But yeah, I think, a lot of times I find that young people are like, early on kind of not very interested in hunting a lot of times, even though it's like maybe a cultural practice in some areas. But then later on, I think a lot of men struggle with like fragile masculinity or toxic masculinity around them, and kind of get pressured back into doing that. And they feel like it's a way to reinforce their masculinity through violence against innocent creatures. And for me, that just was something I noticed more and more. And was part of the culture I grew up in. And the more I noticed that, the more I was just like, I don't want to participate in this, and the more scientific evidence I saw against that stance as well, against hunting, like the less it made sense. Right. And I think a lot of people experience that cognitive dissonance from a cultural and social level, to just completely ignore these scientific evidence, that does, that should change their minds. But yeah, it can be difficult talking to some hunters, like a brick wall or something.
Yeah, I listen, I see the comments, and I know all the pros, I know all the cons. But here's the thing: we're talking about conditioning for anything here in the United States, around the world, how we view things, and the hunter, quote unquote, I have air quotes, right, often portrays oneself as someone who's really providing for his family, through successful kills and for harvesting, right, or maintaining population. But unfortunately, in my experience, and when you remove the conditioning, this posture, this ideology seeks to constantly ritually reestablish what I think is the stereotypical masculine provider role, and it's a problem. And when you really look at hunting hunting today. In reality, hunting today is typically not a source of provision, and it usually can drain family resources. So for instance, if I'm thinking about deer hunting, they spend on average $20 per pound, say, of venison, because when you consider the cost of the equipment, the licenses, the transportation, the unsuccessful hunts, so on and so forth, so you're not really saving money with it either. So, and it's not wrong. These are the facts. I'm looking at so the knee-jerk reaction from everyone in the comments is that it's because it's been so, this is the way it should be, and how dare you speak differently. I think what Ben is trying to do, and he's doing a great live, and someone should come up and engage. There's something deeper that's going on. And I just did a study regarding Portugal. You have many major, say, Western nations, Portugal, parts of the Netherlands, parts of Latin America, who are all in general decreasing and looking to decrease animal agriculture and increase legume production, different types of farming practices, and incorporating those plant-based ideas into national forums. The United States is very stuck. We can see it. We're backwards. We still don't have a food system that addresses all of the health issues. We are one of the fattest nations on this planet. So yeah, I know this lady. This lady has over 40 years of experience and legislates. So would you like to have a dialogue? Come up and use your big words and we can have a conversation. So I think, it's not, here's the thing. I think we could have common ground if at least I could hear a man say, I'm doing it because it's entertainment. I'm doing it because I enjoy being out in the woods, being close to nature. It's something that I grew up doing, but don't lie. Don't be disingenuous in saying that you're doing it to do population control. You've been fed a lie, and let's talk from a place of agreement.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, it's interesting seeing the different psychology behind a lot of these hunters' stances. Because some hunters try to argue that it's like altruism, that they would take, a sick animal over a healthy animal, that they wouldn't, that they're against trophy hunting, and then some people are just like, no, I want to go out and I want to get the trophy, and so it's very interesting seeing that kind of huge spectrum of differences within the hunting community. But I think a live like this and a topic like this really gets people thinking about their impacts in the environment. And then it can lead into that discussion of the individual impacts,
Right.
that we're having on these animals. So we've had a lot of really good discussions. I know the comments can be absolutely insane. You should see some of the Instagram comments right now on some of the coyote videos. I think it just passed over 1,500 comments of mostly similar stuff to what you're seeing here. Absolutely ridiculous stuff, name calling, just crazy misinformation. But it does get people thinking, I think. And that's kind of the intention here, and to try to have some genuine conversations. I do actually have a debate with Hunting Appalachia on January 11th at 5 p.m. Eastern. So that should be a really good one. I think he's actually live right now doing some debates, but he tries to say that vegans should be hunters or should support hunting. So he has a really kind of weird perspective. And my friend Ozark actually debated him yesterday, and it was a really good conversation. But he has some interesting perspective, but he does have a background in wildlife management and conservation. So it's interesting hearing that factual take on conservation and wildlife management, but really missing the ethics, behind a lot of our arguments.
Right.
So trying to bridge that gap is kind of what I'm, seeking to do with these discussions.
Well, so degrees and qualifications. So yes, wildlife management these are real deep conversations. I mean, you should pull someone up. I mean, but you have to, for the hunters in there, I think it's important to understand that it's more than just, it's an ethical issue. It's looking deeper within yourself about, some of the conditioning, some of the things that we've been told in terms of who we are in relation to this planet, and are we ready to have a different conversation?
Yep. Hey, Charles, how's it going?
Going good. So are you a vegan? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm Ben, the vegan farmer. So the topic today is about hunting being part of conservation. So are you a hunter?
Yep. Since I was a young kid, and I'm 64 years old.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, I have almost 3 decades of hunting experience, so I'm well versed on a lot of the hunting arguments. But why do you think hunting is part of conservation?
Because like wolves and coyotes, we killed off all the predators. I mean, there's nothing else going to take care of them but us.
So wolves and coyotes are predators.
Yeah, I know, but if they
So
if they
why
thrive,
would
if
why
they
should
get
we
too,
kill? So if your
yeah, go ahead.
argument is why that we've killed off all the predators, but you're saying that we need to manage the predators with more killing now?
Yeah, you have to manage the predators because there's nothing taking them out. And then what happened is we created farms with cows and they're fenced in, and they start wreaking havoc on the farmers. And if we don't
So I think
control it,
this is a common thing I hear, but I think it highlights kind of a misunderstanding or a lack of education on ecology. So are you familiar with like the trophic system in ecology?
no.
Yeah, so the trophic system is like you have, herbivores and the prey. Then you have mesopredators, which are like opossums, foxes, things that can eat plants but also eat some animals. You also have detritivores, which are eating, decaying things and dead animals. And then you'll also have predators, different levels of predators, within the ecosystem. And currently, coyotes in the eastern U.S. are playing the role of the apex predator because, like you mentioned, we've extirpated the majority of predators in the eastern United
Yeah,
States.
we did.
So there's a lot of different things within inside of the ecosystem that help to manage these populations already. And typically, hunters and hunting actually causes more issues within these ecosystems than it causes good. So there's natural
What
controls.
manages? Can I say something? What
Sure, please.
manages their population that you're
Yeah,
talking about?
that's actually what I was just going to speak to. So within ecosystems, there's a carrying capacity, right? So for something like coyotes, it's how many rodents and how many prey animals are available. For things like deer, it's how many browse species of plants are available. So that's one means of population control, which helps to manage, how many species can live in that ecosystem.
So
You
they
also have
starve to death.
competition. So I
So they
didn't quite finish
starve
my
to death.
point. So I didn't quite finish my point though. So there are a lot of different, things. So if you want me to lay them all out, or we could talk about, specifically carrying capacity if that's what you'd like to focus on and ignore the other mechanisms of population control.
So the lack of food controls it, but they starve to death in the meantime till it balances
So
out.
so Charles, why do you think it's better for you to go and unalive animals? Why is that more moral than them starving to death?
I don't know. I wish someone would shoot me if I was starving.
But that's a
We
little
don't
bit of a
want that. We don't want that.
right, yeah, and
Seriously,
that's a
I'm
little bit of a
serious.
false dichotomy, right? Like, I mean, like the option is not just starve to death or be shot, right? Like these
It's
animals
called
can
putting.
migrate.
It's called
Sorry, go
putting
ahead.
yourself out of out of misery.
Right. So,
You know.
so how do you determine, if the animals you are hunting, if their population is at carrying capacity when you're a hunter?
Well, I've hunted in places that were like had an abundance of deer where you go out in the woods and you see so many, and I've hunted in places where there was hardly any. So I can
Yeah.
tell how many's around
So do you
because
do
they
a
can't
count,
hide
like,
that good.
so
I
do
can
you do a
tell how.
count before the season, or do you rely on the Department of Natural Resources, or
No,
do
I
you
don't
have like a
rely
hunt
on
club that
them.
does?
They're idiots. They don't know what they're
Okay.
doing. They
So
sit in the
how
office.
so Charles, then how do you determine that you're making the ethical choice to take this animal out of the ecosystem if you're not completely sure within the broader ecosystem that there is an overabundance or overpopulation of these animals?
Because when I go out there, if I hunt for weeks on end and I see hardly nothing, I will not shoot any deer.
So this
I
would
won't.
be an anecdote, Charles. So like you don't have actual evidence that there
I
is a
am the
population.
evidence. I am the evidence.
But
Hunters
again,
are
Charles,
the evidence.
that is an
You trust
anecdote.
some guy? You
And
trust some guy in the office that's never been in the woods?
so what you're kind of arguing, it seems like you're getting towards an anti-intellectualism argument where science and biologists and ecologists like don't know what they're doing. And to some
They
degree, I
don't.
think there is. Okay. Well, Charles, I can also say that about you, right? I could also say, well, Charles, you don't know what you're doing. So you're just making a claim to justify unaliving animals unnecessarily. And there's no reason that we need to hunt for population control, because if you're worried about the population of animals getting too high, then we need to assess the land management practices that hunters are perpetuating, right? Like every hunter that I know and my father and, a lot of their friends, they have a hunt club where they make food plots for these animals, right? So
Yeah.
that increases the carrying capacity, right, and provides these animals with food. So if you're hunting to reduce the populations of these animals, why would we also be increasing the carrying capacity in the ecosystems for them?
Well, we're giving the animals food because we care about them. A lot of people think we don't care about the animals,
Charles, if you
and
cared
that's
about
not
them,
true.
you wouldn't be unaliving them, though, Charles. That's kind of a
That's not
contradiction.
true.
I'm pointing out the same
Hey,
contradiction, right, with overpopulation and land management practices for hunters, and then you're saying I care about them, so I have to kill them. Like that. That's all you have
do
so
you
far is
think
contradiction.
do you think the Indians cared about the buffalo? They
I think
worship
that
the buffalo.
I think the Indians were in a state of survival, right? And you go to the grocery
Exactly.
store,
So am
you go to
I.
the grocery store and you get to pick between these different options. And then when you go out to
No, no.
recreationally hunt, you're not surviving off of
Yes,
this
I
animal.
am surviving off it. I eat everything I shoot.
So Charles, do you also go to the grocery store or ever eat out at restaurants?
What's that got to do with it?
Well, I'm pointing out that
Just
you
because
don't
someone does the
survive off of
murdering
these
for
animals.
me, so you're okay with someone doing the murdering for you? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying you can choose options that don't involve the
No,
smurder
I
or
like
the
meat.
unaliving
I
of
like
animals.
meat, and I will eat meat to the day I die.
Right. So this is a taste pleasure. So you're justifying your actions based on your pleasure.
Yes.
And if we also are consistent with
It's
that,
not
we can
pleasure.
justify
I
a
like
lot
it.
of.
Well, that's
Yes,
all.
but what you're arguing, yeah. If you want to take this one over, I'm kind of
No,
frustrated
no,
with
no.
this.
I think Charles, I think that's the point that I was trying to talk about though. Like that's the honest statement right there. Thank you for actually saying it. Because listen, I like pleasure. There are things that give me pleasure, things that give Ben pleasure,
Right.
things that give you pleasure. I hear you. Where the vegan argument comes in, and where we are not seeing eye to eye, is the idea that playing God to make determinations upon what you think should be deemed important for that pleasure. The idea that you are saying that you're cherry picking your argument because it's for your pleasure. And what vegans are only saying is that we come from a social justice mindset where any subjugation or oppression is not something we align ourselves with. So if it means the sacrifice, again, I am someone who has not had any meat for 47 years. I live a completely fantastic diet, and there are tons of food sources in different
Good.
cultures.
I'm glad you have that choice.
Right. Well, everyone has that choice. It's a choice, and it's not an easy one. Let me just
Yeah,
say,
but I made my choice. Are you glad I made my choice?
here's the thing. I respect that, but the thing is, the animal doesn't get the choice. What vegans are
Yeah,
here
it
to
does. It gets a choice not to walk in front of me.
now you just sound mean. You sound mean and like a bully.
There's nothing mean about it. It's
That's
life.
a bold statement. It's like if you want to pick on the person that doesn't have any say in the matter, you're going to pick on them anyway. Do you
Animals do
realize
it.
the audacity of that statement that you just made?
Am I an animal?
I ask you questions. So do you realize the audacity of the statement that you just made? Because something chose to walk in front of you, it deserves to die. That's what you said.
It don't deserve to die, but it's going to.
Because and all I'm saying, what we're up here doing is having a conversation that vegans are trying to speak for those that do not have a voice in front of people like you that felt as if that it was up to you for your pleasure to take their life. And that seems somehow offensive to all the hunters in the chat.
You speak about the lives of the little babies that are being AB'd.
It's not the same. It's not the same.
Oh, I know it's not the same.
I'm not pro. No.
It's worse.
It's
You're killing your own species.
okay, but your place. We're not here to discuss, and especially you are not in any place in any situation to have a conversation regarding what a woman's doing. We're focusing on animals right now. This is not your conversation to
That
have.
baby's my baby too.
Are you giving birth to it?
It's mine.
Okay.
I'm
So-
married. I'm
Okay.
married.
Okay, listen, I hear you, and this is not a conversation regarding abortion. Yeah,
I'm done with Charles,
that's
but
where
please
they
finish
go
your-
when they want to
please finish your
justify
thought.
when they lose the argument, is abortion, because it's just a self-control. Again, I just the lack of it's linear thinking, and the lack of critical thinking is just mind-blowing sometimes.
And he was trying to make the point too that he's an animal, so he can make the same choices animals do, but he's forgetting that humans have, this thing called rationality and moral agency, where we can choose the more moral decision, right? And the decision is not between, going to a restaurant or hunting, or going to the grocery store and picking meat and hunting. It's a lot more complex than that. You have other options than consuming animals' flesh. You are choosing the worst of all of these options by your actions and by what you consume every day. So if you want to make a better choice, let's look at not a false dichotomy. Let's look at all the choices that we have.
Right. Yeah. I just this is a bold one you decided to take on, and I'm I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of the thinking. Go ahead, pull someone else up.
Let's see. I'm double checking because there were some guests yesterday, or actually on Saturday, who didn't get to come up. I'm making sure they're not in the queue.
Red meat are not for us. Red meat, we don't chew the same way animals do, and we don't have the same canines as animals do. So that's a misconception and a myth. Next.
Yeah. All right, let's see. JD0554, how's it going? Oh, he exited the app and he's back. Hello, JD? All right, he must be glitched out. He's been in the queue for a while though, so I feel bad.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are. How's it going?
Sorry, I had you on Bluetooth. It wasn't connecting good on TikTok. I don't know what's going on with it. But anyways, so what is your viewpoint on invasive species that have negative impacts on ecosystems?
Yeah, I actually really love this discussion because it's something that I struggled with for a long time, even after going vegan and considering individuals. But I still, consider that there are alternatives that do not involve violence. We have contraception and sterilization methods. We have catch and release for certain animals that don't have myopic cardiovascular issues or issues with catch and release. There's so many different ways to approach invasive species. So I don't think that hunting is a valid or ethical approach to invasive species.
Okay, I've heard this argument before, and so we have I don't really want to call it epidemic or pandemic of swine in the southeast United States, but it is a problem. It's become so much of a problem that the federal government is getting involved and is actually in the works of implementing a program to completely eradicate boar in the United States because of how destructive it is to not only farmers and fields and plants and vegetables being farmed, but it's also small animals such as quail, even like fawns. They become prey of hogs themselves.
Well, even there's certain cacti that are being uprooted, and I'm very well aware of the hog issue or the boar issue in the U.S. But can I ask your understanding of the boar issue and how they became a problem in the U.S.?
Oh, I know we brought them over, and they're not. I mean, we brought them over, and people released a few, and that's all it takes. The population they populate so quick that it's kind of hard to control anything in an area.
Can I ask? Are you like one of these hunters that really upset me that are for the culling and hunting of cats?
Cats? No. I genuinely care less about cats. They're not that big of a problem. I think the problem with cats is the crazy cat lady that feeds them over and over, the feral cats. That's the problem with cats.
Feral cats can be a huge issue in ecosystems, and there are huge, even worse than the boar. And in Australia, there's a huge issue with them. And they've actually started hunting them.
I believe that.
Can you tell me the moral difference between the cat and the boar that justifies hunting the boar?
Well, I can't speak on the cat issue. I can't. But I've grown up seeing the boar issue. I've worked on farms, hunted boar myself. As many as we have taken and actually have donated to local migrant camps and stuff like that, because we just honestly we don't eat boar because it's kind of nasty. In my opinion, we've donated them to migrant camps to feed the workers and stuff like that. We made zero impact on.
All right, JD, I need you to refocus here. You're getting way far off topic. I'm asking you the moral difference between cats and the feral boars or pigs or whatever you want to refer to them as. Why is it okay to hunt the pigs but not the cats? You clearly have some difference that you've recognized between cats and pigs that make you feel it's okay to hunt the pigs but not the cats. And I've muted you because you were kind of rambling on there. So you got to click on your profile and then click the unmute button.
Right. I didn't realize I got muted. So I don't really have a moral difference on the stand of cats
Okay.
being hunted. I mean,
Right.
if it gets to the point of it needing to be, so be it. But they are, I guess, considered more of a house pet. You know, I understand why people have moral issues.
So you said, I hear you've made a valid, rebuttal, or responding to my question. Now I would ask you though, in the case of the cat, if it was between hunting them, you going out and hunting these cats, or you going out and putting some sterilization, pharmaceuticals in their feed, would you choose to give them sterilization ethically, or would you choose to unethically end their lives?
So okay, so I'm not paying to sterilize a cat. You know, it's not me. I'm not paying to sterilize a thing. So this is my reason behind it. The thing about sterilization of a species is it comes down to who's paying for it, and likely it's the local government or the government itself. You know, the problem is I'm not going to do it, and the simplest and the cheapest option for me as an individual or anybody, it's going to be plain out just make it quick.
Okay, what if it was more expensive? What if you were going to be charged to go hunt them, or you were going to be paid to go and you were given free sterilization medicine to just put out with the cat lady's feed?
Oh, if someone's paying me to sterilize, I'm all about making money doing it. Whatever, that's fine. Okay. But it's certainly never going to cost money to do so. I mean, yeah, permitting, licensing, and all that stuff. Yeah, that costs money, but it's never going to cost big money to hunt, other than just physically getting there and doing it.
But I feel like you're kind of avoiding the ethical situation of this question that I'm asking you, and you are kind of jumping around. So again, you've already highlighted that you see no moral difference between the pigs or the cats, but for some reason you choose to do something that's more ethical with the cats, but you want to unalive the pigs, right? Do you see that as a weird contradiction? Is it just that one's a cat and one's a pig and you don't like pigs, or?
It's not that I don't like them. It's just I honestly got no. I don't know. The sterilization with pigs in my opinion, is a hard thing to do. In my opinion.
So there's a pharmaceutical called PZP, and it could be administered through tranquilized darts, so darting. So we could encourage through incentive programs to have hunters go and do that. Pigs can also be relocated. So we could provide fixed areas where these pigs could be relocated to live in safe areas where they wouldn't mess up crops. There's a lot of different alternatives that don't involve ending that animal's life. But for some reason, hunters always want to try to argue that hunting is the only way that this will work. Why do you think? The
relocation of hogs is they travel. They travel quick if they want to. They can travel. They can put down some distance over time.
Okay, but how does that counter anything I just gave to you as far as tranquilizing, sterilization, or relocation into controlled areas?
So, that just comes down to who's paying for it.
Well, it's a monetary issue, right? We're talking about, because cats aren't destroying, it's all about production, right? And farming. And this is what we're talking about, and livelihood. If we're talking just biologically speaking, and using the idea of invasive species, that idea, unfortunately, is what I would consider fundamentally flawed. It's assuming really that ecosystems are static with somehow a fixed set of species, and if they, come in to live in them, they are unwelcomed, and then we try to classify them as alien species. But honestly, the truth is that any balanced habitat here in the United States or around the world, and ecosystems, they achieve their balance dynamically, never statically. There's always new species coming and going, either from migration efforts or from evolution, just in and of itself. So, I mean, we used to have camels here in North America, a few thousand years ago. So things change, nature shifts. But we're talking about what you're saying specifically, and I hear you. It's that we're talking about livelihood. We're putting a monetary dollar and an assignment to the reason why you can justify hunting one versus another. And that's really what it comes down to. And I hear what you're saying, and I respect what you're saying. But let's talk about the bottom line. We're talking about profit.
Yeah, I mean, we already do pay hunters
So
to do things like this, right? Like there are programs where, the USDA goes out and spends taxpayer dollars to round up horses, or to go after boars. So, we are already spending tax dollars to do the unethical thing, right? So as technology gets better and as we as a society prefer more ethical solutions to these invasive species problems, surely we should choose the ethical solution, right? So like if there was no cost difference, why would we not choose the more ethical solution that didn't involve unaliving these animals?
Well, that's the thing, though. There will always be a cost difference. Okay, I mean, somebody's paying for it regardless, whether it's coming from tax dollars or it's coming from individual pockets. Somebody is paying for it, whether someone's making money off of it or losing money off of it. But regardless, it's costing in the end, no matter what. One's going to cost substantially more than the other.
So do you have evidence for that claim?
30-30 from my rifle cost about $2 expensively to tranquilize a what do you call it, a hog, and give it whatever pharmaceuticals, what time and money and all that stuff. I mean, I'd have to look it up, but I know it's a lot more than $2.
Money is the same, right? Like the only difference is the ammunition at this point,
right? And
the weapon that's being used, right? So like the cost difference is probably cheaper to produce these pharmaceuticals at scale than it is to create ammunition that's being taxed. So like you're claiming like anecdotal evidence, like you're just saying, I know how much my bullet is, but I don't know how much these pharmaceuticals are. So you can't actually make that claim. And again, I've already demonstrated to you that we are spending taxpayer dollars on these problems already to do the unethical thing, right? So like if we could spend taxpayer dollars on the same type of approach, except using ethical methods, why would we not do that?
I just don't think there's enough of it to do the ethical way that you are proposing. What you're saying is ethical. I don't think there's enough people or evidence that you can run and say that, okay, we can completely exterminate a population by sterilizing it. And I believe the amount of money and effort it would take to do so is substantial.
Well, again, you're making a claim without evidence, right? And so we have studies looking at deer populations where we use PZP. We have even other species of animals that we've done sterilization on, not involving capture and release, that has shown significant benefits to decreasing the populations in areas like close to human development where it doesn't make sense to reintroduce predators. So we have evidence of these things working. Again, I agree that there could be economic hurdles to overcome, but it's 2024. Ammunition's probably not going to be getting cheaper, but technology and the development of chemical solutions for things are getting cheaper, right? And if we can make a ethical decision between one or the other, considering the cost, then we should obviously make the ethical decision. And I don't think that there is enough, people hunting to take care of these issues, unless we start spending even way more money, to get hunters to do this. I do realize that hunters do enjoy, the thrill of, chasing these animals down, and some people use dogs and all sorts of horrific methods, to satisfy what I would consider bloodlust. But it's unnecessary, right? Like there's so many different ways we could go about these issues, but we're choosing to, focus on the violent solutions rather than the nonviolent ones. And in my opinion, it would be more worthwhile, since most people through polls show that people prefer nonviolent means of conservation rather than trophy hunting or other, violent means of conservation, that we as a society should be moving towards more ethical solutions to these problems rather than focusing on consumptive behaviors like hunting.
So I do have another question running off the sterilization side of things. I'm not trying to focus on this, but what happens when you start introducing those chemicals to an ecosystem? Say a hog dies of whatever age, natural phenomenon, whatever, and whatever animal that is carnivorous decides to eat it and starts introducing those chemicals into their system.
Yeah, I mean that comes down to the efficacy, of the chemicals and their impact on ecosystems, and it's something we do have to study. But I'm pretty sure PZP, if that is, I'm pretty sure that's the name of the drug used for sterilization in white-tailed deer, has been shown to not impact ecosystems. But I would need to double check that. I think that's something we would consider. And if we care about these solutions, it is something we would be looking at, obviously. So I agree with you. That is of concern.
So one more point, and I'm done after this, but chronic waste disease, I would assume you're familiar with that a little bit?
Very much so. Yes, sir.
Okay, so I live down here in Florida. We've had one case of chronic waste disease, and that was last year, the year before last. And that was a roadkill deer that a biologist just grabbed a sample from.
Yep. And
the only reason why I know this because I actually spoke to a biologist from FWC. I had a good conversation about it. They haven't had any more confirmed cases of CWD in the past year and a half because, they just haven't had them because all the samples that they've gotten, they've had all negative outcomes, and the only way they get all these samples is just from them walking up to hunters. Hey, you mind if we take a blood sample or this and that and this? Without the hunters, they wouldn't have all that unless they were physically darting deer or whatever to pull samples, pull their glands and stuff like that. And the problem with chronic waste disease, coming from the biologist, is it takes 3 to 4 years to physically show sign of chronic waste disease.
Okay. So why do you think that hunting is a solution to chronic wasting disease?
I don't think it's a solution of. I think it's a solution to control chronic waste disease. Keep it out of the area.
So we actually have a lot of studies on chronic wasting disease, and this is a pretty common argument that I debate a lot of conservationists with. So I'm glad you bring it up. It hasn't been brought up during this stream, so props to you for that. But we do see actually increased rates of transmission, really poor hunting practices like improper disposal of carcasses after on-site processing. But we also have studies showing that predators actually can help reduce the spread of chronic wasting disease because they're actually consuming the majority of the animal, and through their processing and excretions, they actually can reduce the spread of chronic wasting disease. Whereas humans, since chronic wasting disease, the prions are found in the blood, in the urine, as well as the saliva of these animals. Primarily, it's in the brainstem or the nervous system of these animals. So that's what biologists are normally testing, but it is throughout the entire animal, even early on in infection. So by hunters unaliving these animals and coming in contact with the blood and the other, things that they would be coming in contact with when they're processing the animals or when they're having a butcher process the animals, actually increases the transmission rate within the ecosystem. So hunting is not really a viable solution. Again, like if we have overpopulation or overabundance of deer in these areas, we're seeing signs of CWD, the best method would be to sterilize these animals to further reduce the populations, or to introduce predators where appropriate in more wild and less populous areas, because the predators would keep these populations in check. And also the predators do a better job of targeting these sick animals right? Whereas hunters typically are looking for a larger or healthier animal. But some hunters who claim to be altruistic will say, well, I'd rather take, that was actually a debate yesterday. I heard a hunter say that he would rather take the sick animal just knowing that he's trying to help with CWD. But I find that a little disingenuous because I don't think most hunters would actually be doing that. But props, if that really is your concern, I think that is, potentially a better way to go about it, but it's still putting you in potential contact with CWD. There's no known transmission to humans right now, but it's only a matter of time for,
It's similar to mad cow disease. They figured, oh, it's fine, you can eat it, and then somebody got mad cow disease, and then they're like, oh, nope, gotta kill all
it's only a
to
matter of
eradicate it.
time. It's only a matter of time before these types of issues jump into other species and then, mutate to where they can jump into humans. So the less kind of interaction that humans have with these animals is better. And I would argue that hunters are actually at more risk for not only increasing the spread, but for also helping that mutation happen. So I think that, for CWD, the best things we could do are non-interventionist ethical approaches to conservation.
I mean, I see your point. I get your points. I am open to viewpoints, but I mean, it's just, yeah.
Can I have just some curiosity, because I know very little bit about chronic waste disease, just that, and I was in big pharma as a specialist for a major Fortune 250 corporation. So in terms of that, I'm just curious because it's a form of encephalitis, but let me ask you, have they only noticed it in the past 10 years? Have they made any correlations between building? Is there a certain region that chronic waste disease is occurring more often in the United States than somewhere else? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we are seeing certain areas over others. It definitely is in more of the populous areas where there are concerns about overpopulation, like within the ecosystem, where deer are already stressed through overconsumption of their carrying capacity and overbrowse. And we're also seeing more rates where there are no predators, right? So, like I mentioned, predators are more likely to go out of their way to hunt these weaker individuals and process and consume these individuals that have CWD, whereas a hunter might, either avoid them or unalive the animal and leave it, which then puts other animals in contact with the carcass. But yeah, I'm not sure how recent. I do want to say it's within the last 2 or 3 decades that the cases have been growing. But yeah, I'm not sure on the first case at all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Great debate, guys.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming up, JD, and I really appreciate the insights and you bringing up CWD. That was a really good discussion. But yeah, I hope you'll give these kind of thought, these arguments a thought, and consider that there might be alternatives to conservation than hunting.
Yeah, I've definitely given it a thought. I mean, I'm actually about to invest into which it might be in the near future. It actually might be an advantage to me. I'm about to invest into thermal imaging drones, stuff like that, to do numerous things. One is, doing what y'all don't agree with, which is locate wounded prey. Wounded deer, hogs, or whatever like that. Somebody is shot, they can't find, and probably a bad shot. But also, I want to use it as a form of tracking local population of hogs to and y'all's idea might be implemented in the future, or maybe sterilization or whatnot. But it's just, as you say, with technology, I can't think of the word right now. Technology advancements, things might become what I guess in y'all's better half, I guess.
Yep. Well, JD, I appreciate you coming up, man, and hope you have a great rest of your week.
Yep. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah, I do think it's worth, I'm seeing some valid comments about the overpopulation arguments and how long have we been saying that we're having overpopulation issues? Well, hunting's actually been on the decline as far as the hunting population of registered hunters since about 1980. We've had a 50% decrease in the number of registered hunters. Now, of course, some hunters are out there doing it, without being registered, without having licenses. So we don't really know. But yeah, even through polling, we see that the general populace more approves of more ethical approaches to overpopulation rather than hunting or incentivizing like trophy hunting or the culling of predators and things like that. So
Very interesting. That was an interesting conversation and
yeah,
very nicely done. I had a couple of people that wanted to come up.
yeah, the CWD is always a good discussion, especially with like people well versed in it. Ethan, the Hunter Appalachia guy that I'll be debating, is really well versed in it. But yeah, a lot of hunters don't look at the things that counter their, wanting to hunt, right? So like they might be like, well, I don't know about the predator thing, and it's like, well, we have studies on this, like we can look at it. So let's see, next guest here, Virtual Vibes, inviting you up. Virtual Vibes, it's a vibe. Let's see if you load up here. Ding. Okay, tree hugger. Yeah, I do love hugging trees. They're chill. It's a great way to ground.
Yep. You haven't hugged a tree? Shame on you. You should get out there and
really
hug. It's a shame.
should hug trees. All right,
just a
virtual
couple,
vibe. Sorry, go ahead.
no, a couple of things. Just like there's a couple of misconceptions. Number one, I am in a city area, and I have lived in California, so I do understand about living on a farm. But you are completely the opposite of that, so you have different experiences. The other thing that I noticed too, some of the things. Go ahead. Wait, let's see. You wanted to pull him up? Virtual
no,
vibe?
he wasn't loading, so I left. I kicked him out. It was taking too long to load him in, but
Right.
I'll go ahead and bring the next one in here. Caleb.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, Caleb. Yeah, we can hear you. How you doing?
Hey, good. I've been very eager to get in here because this is actually hunting's my life. I love hunting.
Okay.
But I also see a few points you make. I really do. But I feel like a little bit, and I'm really gonna be as respectful as possible. I feel like you're almost degrading hunters as people because we care so deeply about these animals. And myself, I live in Iowa, so we have one of the just the best wildlife for whitetails out here. And hunting here in Iowa is almost you almost have to do it. It seems like, and for myself, it's like this isn't about really survival. This is just what I love to do. It's what I love to do. I love hunting, and I'll tell you what, Ben. I mean, I don't know you too well, and I feel like the argument I'm going to make is really good. But I sit in a tree, man, and I'm just so at peace with everything around me. And I have seen I have seen female does. I've seen them walk by, and I don't have the heart to take that shot or this, that, and the other because that is such a beautiful, beautiful animal. But the way that I view hunting and the reason I'm so proud of hunting is because my objective isn't to go in there and violently kill. I passed one of the biggest deer I've seen in my life this year at 20 yards because I didn't have a good fatal shot on this deer. I had my bow drawn back, and in my mind, in that moment of me watching this massive, mature whitetail walk through the timber, I'm thinking if I can't put a good kill shot on him, then he's gonna suffer. You're right. He's gonna violently die or suffer, whatnot. And as a hunter, that kills us. That kills us as a hunter to know that I cannot believe that I just injured that animal because of negligence to practicing. And I don't like. Go ahead.
I've got a few points because like I definitely hear this argument a lot from hunters. Like I care a lot, and I thought the same thing when I was a hunter too, right? Like I was a hunter for 26 years. I grew up in a hunting household. I was part of a hunt club on our property. I helped manage the land. I helped butcher these animals and process them and consume them. So I've seen the whole process, and I definitely understand your argument. But first off, I would say that for me, my transition from hunting into not hunting went through foraging, right? So like I still got the same things you're talking about sitting in that tree stand, like going out and looking for mushrooms or looking for plants. And I actually found a deeper connection with that because rather than being worried about my violence toward this animal that I might want or, might do for some purpose, I'm looking at this nonviolent thing and I'm learning about the ecosystem in a far deeper level than anything I ever participated in hunting. So my question to you, I'd like to get into like why you think it is like you respecting these animals or valuing these animals as individuals to take their lives. But I'd like to propose this hypothetical first to kind of see how you would approach this situation. So you said like in your state there's abundant population of white-tailed deer. So let's say that in your area there were reintroduction of wolves or coyotes or some predator, with the intention of getting that predator population to a level where there's a balance, right, in the ecosystem. There's a healthy trophic system, a healthy apex predators, healthy mesopredators, and a healthy prey population, right? And ecologists and conservationists came in and after years, they were like, hey, we got it to this perfect level. It's all balanced. Like there's always going to be ebbs and flows within these populations, but we're in a healthy range. Would you support the ending of hunting in that situation?
I'm sorry, your mic just muffled at the very end. Did you just ask me if I would support the funding of hunting?
The ending, like the prohibition of hunting in the situation where there is a healthy ecosystem balance.
Absolutely not.
So why so?
Because this is people's hobby. Let's just put hobbies aside. This is people's livelihood. What do you think about? Have this argument with an Amish person. Tell them to not deer hunt.
No, I'm having the argument with you though. So let's not deflect onto other populations. So let's talk about ourselves here because I'm speaking with you. I'm not speaking. I don't get the feeling that you're Amish. So like you said hobby at first, but then you said you shifted to livelihood. So
right.
I think you probably like me were in a privileged position where you did it more as like a sport, right? And you've already expressed, like you do it because you enjoy getting into the woods, right? And maybe you don't always like the ending of that animal's life. So the hypothetical I put forward to you could still involve you going out into the woods and enjoying nature, but you just wouldn't be able to unalive these animals because the ecosystem's in a good position. Now, you said that you don't support that, right? So that to me indicates that you're doing it for some other reason or you value the ending of the animal.
Okay, I agree. What you said is valid. Now let me reiterate that question a little bit and let me put it into perspective, okay? You said that you're a previous hunter, right? How did oh my goodness, excuse me, gun or bow? Like what would you mainly do, gun or bow?
So I didn't like bow because I thought it was unethical because it's so much harder to get a clean unaliving. And I think even now, I think that bow hunters are actually far more, a lot of them say it's more ethical, but I think that it's far harder to.
I would say, as a hunter who does both, I would say it's 50-50. It just really depends as to what kind of hunter you are. So let me put this into your perspective for myself. Okay. The season for me is over. I'm done deer hunting right now. I'm not sitting on, obviously I'm on TikTok live with you, but my mindset's already on 2025 and how am I going to kill the buck that outsmarted me this year, literally outsmarted me. So when I go in there, I'm not just anything you do in life, you want to do it with a purpose, right? Anything that can go from going to the grocery store, playing basketball or hunting. So for me, I am waking up at 4 a.m. on a cold, windy, rainy, snowy, whatever the temperature is, I'm waking up to outsmart this deer. And not only am I going to outsmart this deer, but I'm going to do it in a way that has never been changed. I'm not doing this out of a blind. I'm doing this out of a tree stand. I am relying on the gear that I'm wearing to keep me warm, and I am relying on pure silence, pure quietness to outsmart this mature buck. Do you think, and genuinely, do you think that, these deer are just not like creatures that don't think? Do you know how hard it is to kill a mature whitetail? Do you know how hard it is to kill a mature doe?
Obviously, I understand that these animals are sentient creatures. That's why I care for them, Caleb. Hold on, Caleb. You've spoken. I think you've made.
Well, I didn't even finish my point, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was going to say your intention is to unalive this animal, right? When you do not need to. You're doing it for your enjoyment or to add some extra meat to your food, right?
Absolutely.
So it's unnecessary, right? You can get that same enjoyment by going out and foraging mushrooms or going out for a nature walk. Like there is a huge difference between going out and enjoying like something like taking a picture of that animal versus you going out and taking the animal.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing, Ben, is hunting has been around since time. It's been
Okay.
around and it's everywhere. And it'll never not be anywhere. Because
So
it's been around.
hold on. Okay.
It's just like the government almost. It's like the
Okay.
election.
All right.
You can never get
All
rid
right.
of the
You-
election
you
because
made
the
two
election
claims.
is traditional.
You've made two claims. So first off, you've made an appeal to tradition fallacy. So you're saying because we've done something for a long time that it's okay. So that's a fallacious reason. Second, you said it's not going anywhere. So earlier you might have missed it. You might not have been in the queue yet. But since 1980, the hunting population has been on the decline, right? Hunting contributes less than 10% to conservation.
Yeah, you want to know why? Because people hoard land. Land is not accessible for people to go hunt. So then people have to go hunt on.
I mean, I disagree. I live in a county where there's tons of land.
Ben, I have a
and most
question.
of
Would
that
you let me go
land-
hunt your
Okay.
property right now?
No, I would not because I
Okay,
protect my.
there you go.
But
There's
you
one
didn't let
less
me
person
finish-
and one
you
less
didn't let me
property that
finish
I'm
my
able to
argument, Caleb. Caleb, you didn't let me finish my argument.
I am sorry. Go ahead.
You're getting a little frustrated with me.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go
But
ahead.
like our county is mostly timber property. The entire county, thousands of acres. Most of this property is either timber or pasture. And most of this property has hunt clubs on them where they lease land even to people out of state to come and hunt this property. So your argument that land is not available for hunting is really ridiculous. Even when there's public land, for people who do not have land access to go and hunt, right? There's wildlife management areas that have public hunts for various different species of animals. So land access is not really a problem for hunting. The problem is that most people don't want to go and violently unalive an animal for fun.
I would say the last point that you made is a valid point, but I would also disagree with you on the land accessibility, just because land is almost becoming an investment these days, where people from California are buying it because land is an investment. It's like a watch. It's like anything. It's like a old antique car almost. Like you keep it and it just adds value. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Like, Caleb, do you have evidence for that? Like even anecdotal evidence? Like do you or any of your friends like struggle to find somewhere to hunt every year? Like I'm just not really sure like there's evidence for that, even anecdotal.
Absolutely, there's evidence, and it may not be on paper, and it probably is on paper somewhere. But from my own experiences, every piece of property's got someone who's hunting it. So, and loyalty runs deep in the hunting community, and it's like, I don't want someone random on my property when someone I know who's been my buddy for 10 years is hunting it. That's not fair to my buddy. So, I mean, obviously that's the landowner's decision, but it's still just becoming because I can sit here and explain to a landowner saying, sir, I'm after one deer and one deer specifically, but he's not going to, break his loyalty with his previous hunter to, please me.
I just don't really follow your argument because it sounds like you contradicted yourself a little bit there. Like you have land access, you just are looking for a specific buck or something. Like it's kind of weird.
For instance, like I have let's just use my real life perspective right now. I have a piece of property that I want to go hunt. No one hunts it, but the guy doesn't want anyone to hunt it because he just doesn't want anyone to hunt it. I don't know why. I've kind of worked my way into him, and he's let me pheasant hunt it and deer hunt it a little bit this year. But it's like until I have like full control of that property, it's not necessarily super accessible to hunt, And it just he could tell me tomorrow he doesn't want anyone to hunt it, and then I can't hunt it, and then that's one piece of property less that I get to hunt in that area. You know what I mean?
So Caleb, if your main concern is enjoying nature, right? But which I mean, we kind of already come to the conclusion that you do want to unalive these animals for fun. But if you actually care about, I didn't finish my point. If you actually care about enjoying nature and going out and connecting with nature, you have public land, where you can do this. You can go hiking, you can go backpacking, you can go rock climbing. Many state parks and national parks don't even have entrance fees. Some do, but that also goes towards conservation funding. So there are nonviolent alternatives to what you're doing. If accessibility is your issue, you're still overlooking the fact that it's unnecessary, exploitation of wildlife, right?
Right. Okay. Can I ask you, can I create a new topic?
Sure. As long as
what gives you the right to tell me that I can't hunt?
I'm not telling you can't hunt, and that's something a lot of hunters seem to think I'm doing.
But just like
Okay,
Go ahead.
this is probably like the third or fourth time you like
I know.
interrupted
I'm
me.
sorry.
with your
I'm bad at that. I'm sorry. I'll control myself.
So like a lot of hunters try to tell me that I'm telling them they cannot hunt. I'm simply trying to convey to you that there are other alternatives to conservation, than hunting for population control or whatever. Like we've gone down this long kind of offshoot about is hunting conservation, and you're arguing like you enjoy it, it's a hobby for you, but there's people that rely on it, and I'm telling you, like there are all these alternatives, right? Like there's ecotourism. You could go out and take pictures. You could go out and forage for plants or fungi. Like there's so many different ways to go about hunting. I'm not telling you that you can't hunt. I'm telling you that you probably shouldn't ethically, right? And that's my entire argument. And like the whole topic, which we're not even covering anymore, is why is hunting conservation, right? And like we're not even on the topic right now. So hopefully, like maybe your next question or points here, could be maybe related to the topic, or we could talk about ethics more.
Right. And I guess you're right. We kind of are off the topic of is hunting, not conservation. But I feel like, and I was in this live since you had 60 viewers. So I've been in here for probably however, I've been in here for a while, but I've just listened to these people like, I think his name's Hunt Detail. I've listened to you, the way he portrayed things, and you completely just like reworded it to make it sound like his opinion's not validated. And it was the same with the guy who was just previously live about the boars. Like you started bringing up, why can't I just kill feral cats? A boar and a cat are two different things.
Okay, well, let's play that game then. Like, what is the difference between a cat and a boar that justifies you taking the boar but not the cat's life?
The boar is horrific for the ecosystem. It is terrible.
Okay. Why do you think it's horrific? Like we could also make that same look, Caleb. We could also make that same argument for cats. Cats have negative impacts on ecosystems. Outdoor cat unalive tons of native wildlife, from ground dwelling birds to also flying songbirds to snakes to lizards. Like so much biodiversity is lost because of outdoor cats. So by that same rationality, let's say that outdoor cats have this exact same impact to agricultural crops or biodiversity or whatever it is as feral pigs. There's no difference in their impacts to the ecosystem. What is the moral difference between taking the pig but not the cat?
Well, the cat's not trying to maul my face off, for starters.
Well, not all pigs do that. I mean, I understand. I know
Ben, if you can trap.
Okay, this is another case where you've interrupted me when I'm trying to make my point. This is number 4. Feral pigs will attack people if you get in between them and their offspring, right? Like that is when most feral pig attacks happen. So like respecting these animals, like distance is very key to not getting attacked by these animals. But just like most wild animals, they're not really interested in getting near humans, right?
I mean,
Can I just say one thing? Here's the thing, and Caleb, you've given some really great arguments, and I think and I hear your enthusiasm. I hear that you like being in nature, which is beautiful. I think it's I think all of the above. But where I want to go with this is just say that it's interesting. I have a tendency to look straight to a hypocritical argument. It's just the way my mind thinks. And when I hear about hunters talking about ecosystems, worrying about losses of this, and they're choosing what animals, say, for instance, is worthy of hunting over another, the most destructive creature on this planet that has destroyed almost 83% of all mammals and half of plants, since the 1980s, is man. If you really want to talk about what destroys species, it's me and you.
I agree, 100%.
So that's the conversation that vegans are coming to. In other words, we have to hold nature. Our goal as human beings should be to be the shepherds, the stewards of maintaining biodiversity, not cherry picking which one works for us because of our primordial pleasures. That's the argument.
Right. So let me say this before I say my piece. I do want to say that, I had a little bit of some built up frustration, and Ben, I'm sorry for interrupting you, because I feel like arguments like this are so good because it's very eye opening for both parties. Yep. And I do want to say this, Ben, my last question to you before I leave, what would be your opinion on this? Okay. I'll tell you how I hunt, and then you can kind of pro and con me against the average hunter. But I'm not. I have a really good heart for animals, and sometimes it's sad for me to take a female deer over a mature buck, you know, or like I absolutely hate how people will go out and just start killing raccoons. I don't like that, you know, because I think it's just wrong. And it's like, it's almost like, why are you, because no one's eating a raccoon. They don't taste good, right? So why are you doing that? Just let that thing live. Let it live its life. But like, there are some people, and they hunt in my area, like the Amish, who rely on deer season, you know, and they rely on this. So I guess my question to you is, as myself as a hunter, someone who is after one specific deer, who doesn't go out and kill possums and coyotes like that, who just mainly hunts one big buck for the sole reason of, I'm proud of this deer. Do you respect that hunting more than you, or, you know, do you see anything wrong with how I do it?
I mean, I definitely respect your appreciation for the animals, you know, and I do think that needless killing of like detritivores and methopredators like, you know, raccoons and opossums and things like that is just absolutely ridiculous. So
I can agree with that.
Yeah, and I very much appreciate when hunters like call out that, because I think that's important within inside the community, right? To call out these actions, right? Like if we're getting
100%.
or trophy hunting and all of these things. But like my criticism, you know, for you would be that it's still unnecessary, right? Like in the same way that I realized a lot of my hunting was unnecessary, right? It wasn't something I was relying on, like you say, the Amish, you know, or people in Alaska, you know, maybe literally cannot get to grocery stores at certain times of the year, things like this. Like we have choices, right? And when we can make a compassionate choice over a violent choice that creates a victim, that the big buck you're looking for, like I think that it's clear that we should make the compassionate choice. And for me, it was very obvious when I gain that empathy with these animals, right? And I realized that that wild boar, you know, is no different than the cats I love, right? And that deer is no different than the dog I love, right? And I can empathize with both animals in their want to live, their want to return to their herd or their family, you know, and their inherent intrinsic value that they have, you know, and their rights to not be harmed. And so for me, like I would very much encourage you to just pick up photography, you know, instead, or you know, pick up foraging. Like I think that is more ethical. And again, like I commend you for your efforts to try to do it as ethically as you can. I think that is amazing. But I also think you could make another step towards more compassionate choices to not take these animals' lives, right? And like on my farm, we have over 100 acres that we manage for mostly wildlife. We also have an animal sanctuary where we rescue farm animals and domestic animals from situations of neglect or slaughter-bound situations. So like there are compassionate choices that you can make both in the field, you know, in nature, as well as like in the grocery store. So like, you know, it's a huge spectrum, and I think you're definitely on your way to, you know, more compassionate choices. But all of these conversations are to get people thinking about their choices, right, and their impacts on individuals as well as the ecosystem. And I really think you're like on that path, right? And your willingness to even have this conversation is like huge, man. So I give you props.
Well, I want to say this before I leave, that I do really appreciate the way that you two, I don't know this gal, I don't know your name, but I feel like you two really approach this in a very respectful and appropriate way. And you don't want this to like escalate into something where it is, you know, becoming like cussing at one another. So I really appreciate that. And I also do appreciate the information you've given me. And I hope you appreciate some of the information I've given you. And I say my piece. You guys have a blessed evening and enjoy the rest of your 2024. So
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Appreciate you, Caleb. Yeah, good conversation. And yeah, I mean, I don't think like yelling at each other and like name calling and stuff like that is ever constructive in conveying any sort of message. I know that this app is like huge in like rage baiting, and I know a lot of people think this is even a rage baiting topic. But I do sincerely believe that hunting is not conservation, you know, at a fundamental like semantic level as well as like an ethical level. But yeah, Caleb, huge props to you. W's for Caleb in the chat, like in good conversations.
Absolutely. It was a great conversation. That was really very, very interesting conversation and dialogue between the both of you. Yeah, it's just, here's a lovely thing, Caleb, if you're still listening or whatever, but you know, it's sort of reconstructing the ideas of who we are as human beings in relation to this planet. And you know, someone who's young and someone who wants to be, and we all love being out in nature, right? We feel better. Our blood pressure is reduced. It's helpful for people who have diabetes. I mean, the list is endless when you're grounding, when you're walking among trees, all of the above. But it should mean that we're protecting nature, and animals are part of nature, and they deserve our protection away from us, because we are the most violent creatures on this planet.
Yeah.
In which indigenous cultures surely understood and had their ear closer to the ground than any disconnected hunter living today could ever have.
Yeah.
So
And
I have to say, I even have the questions today, and I had this conversation, with Urban Bongo, and I know some of you may agree and you may be against this again. And I'm an abolitionist, okay? In my utopian world, that's the way I think. I would love to see the complete eradication of animal products in any way, shape, or form. But let me just say this, and if factory farming was not an issue in today's society, the way we know it today, I don't know whether or not we would have such a movement against what we're talking about right now. We have decimated everything, and we have systemized and become bloodthirst in the factory farm environment. And I don't know whether or not it would be such an issue. But this is where we are today. So sometimes the pendulum swings from one direction to another because we need to change our existing system.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, to that point about factory farming, if we do care about conservation, and protecting the natural world, we do need to look at our impacts on everything we do, not just hunting, but, what we're consuming, the products that we're purchasing and, that we're creating demand for. And if we care about land use, animal agriculture is by far the biggest contributor to land use, especially in agriculture. So if you care about conservation, you should definitely be concerned about this. It's also worth considering while we load Cal up here, that, the wildlife is dwindling. We are continuing to take over wild spaces, and it doesn't look like Cal loaded up. But yeah, we're continuing to, extirpate a lot of animals in different areas. And if we care about wildlife, we should be protecting these animals, not trying to, encourage consumptive behaviors like hunting. But I see some good. Sorry, go ahead.
No, what I was just going to say is that, when you, like someone just said in the comments, I mean, these are great questions, right? People starving. How do you support 7 billion people worldwide?
Hold on, sorry.
Hey, Logan. Yeah, we got some background noise, but sounds like you're getting somewhere quieter.
Yeah. So my question to you guys would be, what about Teddy Roosevelt, for instance? His
Great point.
policies he enacted.
Yeah.
It's a great point. Because of Teddy Roosevelt, right? That hunting became really tied into the idea of nostalgia and Americana to which we live today. But go right ahead, Ben. Great point.
No, I was going to say, I really enjoy, looking at the history on conservation, but I do think it's worth, mentioning that the reason that, the conservation movement started was because of over exploitation of our wild resources, right? Both from industries like gold mining and other mining, but also from hunting and trapping, right? And we almost eliminated the wild turkey. We pretty much eliminated the bison. White-tailed deer in many areas were extirpated. So through tight regulation, on hunting, we have changed that. And through various conservation programs, we have changed that. But I think that's kind of gets to the point of my argument for why hunting is not conservation, because hunting is a consumptive behavior, right? Like when you go out and you hunt, you're taking wildlife out, right? Like you're unaliving them and literally taking them out of the ecosystem. And conservation is trying to prevent, this consumptive behavior from becoming a problem, right? So hunting is kind of in contradiction to conservation from my perspective.
I don't know about that. Just because you can't. There are some hunters out there. Not every one of us are, responsible. They don't really think about what they're doing when they hunt. They just go and kill and kill and kill. Well, not all of us are like that. So it's kind of like apples in a barrel. Just because one apple's rotten doesn't mean the whole batch is bad. I've spent so much money over the years, my family has, I know a lot of people that donate to conservation. Um, the turkey banquets, I remember there was a time here that we didn't have, you wouldn't hardly ever see a turkey years ago. Well, the amount of money that was spent over the last couple of years in Tennessee alone has boosted the population of turkeys. They've restarted integration projects where they would raise turkeys up and put them into rural areas that didn't have a solid turkey population to see how that they would bloom and grow over the years. And I think it was a huge success. There are limits. I think those are really important because, like I said, not everybody is as rigid with their hunting. They will take if they are allowed to. Not
Yeah.
everybody's going to follow the rules, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally get your point. I mean, there's definitely, people hunting illegally, right? Like poaching, or not properly doing their tags and things like that. But that still doesn't kind of address the argument I put forward of like hunting being a consumptive tax, right? Like, and you mentioned like turkey, and a lot of the conservation that happened was public funding, for reestablishing these turkey populations.
Well,
And
it was tags, hunters' tags, and the
yeah, so
banquets that they did over the years, all the raffles and things. There was people there that spent thousands of dollars alone. And I'm not talking about like Nashville or Memphis. I'm talking about a podunk, little tiny turkey banquet.
yeah. Yeah, I feel though, like early on, right, when there wasn't an established population, like hunting couldn't have funded that, right? Like unless it was from other tags for other animals. And the analogy I like to put forward is like, when you pay taxes to drive on the roads or have to have a license plate, for your car and your car registration, you're not paying to build the road, right? You're paying to maintain the road. So in that same way, like tags, and fees on hunting, are a consumptive tax, right? It is because hunters are taking something from the ecosystem that we have to spend money on to protect, right? So again, like that highlights the point that I'm making about hunting, being a consumptive behavior where conservation is a protective and preservance behavior.
It's still one of the same, though.
How so?
I mean, it really is, because if it wasn't for responsible hunters putting a push for licenses, the amount of money we spend to go hunt WMAs, trying to think of what else.
Do y'all have fees for WMA? Because in South Carolina, you can just
You have to pay.
for hunt.
You have a separate license to hunt WMA land. The fishing, like hatchery areas, a lot of it is draw hunts. So you can't just go into any WMA because they want to keep the population. Well, when there's so many deer in one area, you've got to go in and kind of manage it a little bit. It's like,
Yeah,
so there was for instance, a place that I hunt now. It used to be an old golf course. You can only hunt it with a bow, and it is absolutely overrun with deer. It's urban all the way around it, other than this 150 plus acre tract. I mean, it's ridiculous how many deer are there, and people complain about it all the time. But then the same aspect, there are people that don't like the fact that we hunt there. But it puts food in my freezer. It helps out the community because I do donate some of the meat to them, family members and such.
So is your argument now that like hunting is a form of conservation because it helps with overpopulation?
Partly, yes, but also the fact that it might be a consumptive, just like gas.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a consumptive. But what I'm trying to say is, if it wasn't for hunters making a push for conservation efforts to continue to have generations of being able to hunt, if it wasn't for Teddy Roosevelt, for instance, we would not be doing any of this today. There wouldn't be animals.
No, I definitely agree with that point. Yeah, historically, I mean, hunters have had a huge role in making sure, that these animals are able to still be exploited. right? And so for getting back to like the overpopulation argument for modern time, a lot of the funding, like through the Pittman-Robertson Act, an 11% tax on ammunition, weapons, and other hunting apparel, as well as a few other, taxes and fees. Also the fees, like you mentioned, like probably for the WMAs, but I know for other state managed lands, as well as license fees and tags. That funding typically goes to fund land management practices to increase the populations of these animals. So that's in contradiction to your argument of like, we're hunting for population control, when in reality the hunting funds more land management for increasing the populations for hunters to continue to exploit. So it's kind of a contradiction to say that, hunting is conservation because of population control, when hunting also contributes to land management practices that help increase the population. Does that
Well,
make sense?
land practices, it's not a bad thing though, because if it wasn't for hunters and all these taxes, then there wouldn't be any public land. Like there wouldn't be a need for it if it wasn't for us.
So nowadays, so nowadays, like you can look this up. There's quite a few different studies to look at conservation funding. So currently, about 94% of conservation funding comes from non-hunting sources, which means about 6% comes from hunters. So that would be those licenses and tags, Pittman-Robertson Act tax, and a few other taxes like that. Contribute only 6% to conservation funding. So the majority of funding publicly in the U.S. actually comes from allocations from Congress through the USDA farm bills, through programs like the USDA Equip, as well as a few other USDA programs. There's also the Endangered Species Act, which allocates a certain amount of public funds, as well as the Land and Water Conservation Act, I believe, LCWS or something like that, which also the tax on oil and gas drilling in the U.S. that contributes to conservation funding. So, I mentioned a few times throughout the stream, but since 1980, the hunting population has been on the decline. So relying on hunters to fund conservation has just become more and more unsustainable, which is why we've had to shift towards, taxpayer allocations for, these conservation programs.
Well, I guess my last thing to say would be, what about all the private organizations like Rocky Mountain Elk, whatever it's called, Ducks Unlimited, all those bigger ones? I mean, they've purchased land on their own, like their own private land, to be able to boost populations for, say, ducks, because I know that there's not a whole lot of well, actually there is. There's pretty good amounts of refuges in Tennessee. But Wyatt, I'm coming, hold on. Anyway, sorry. I'm coming, Wyatt. Anyway, sorry. But Ducks Unlimited, they've put in a great deal of effort into conservation as well, to keep populations growing so we can enjoy tradition. I would say it's a big thing is tradition for me.
No doubt, and I definitely understand that. And like I would like to point out though that like traditions don't necessarily make something a good decision. There are traditions historically that we decided over time and throughout generations that it was worth changing. But as far as funding, like yes, I completely agree. Like organizations like Ducks Unlimited do contribute to conservation of certain lands, but a lot of times those are for hunter exploitation. Sometimes they do create refuges as well. But I would like to point out that there are NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Foundation, or World Wildlife Fund, and Conservation International. In 2022, Nature Conservancy alone contributed $1.3 billion to the global conservation work, which is more than what was contributed by the Pittman-Robertson Act, even in the U.S. So there are a lot of like non-hunting related, nonprofits similar to like Ducks Unlimited, but these nonprofits focus on broader conservation, not specifically for hunters. So I think we're seeing a trend as there are less people interested in hunting. We're seeing a lot more people interested in things like photography of wildlife, outdoor backpacking, things like that get people involved, but not necessarily in the violent unaliving of animals. And we're also seeing a shift in funding, like I mentioned, both publicly and privately for different sorts of conservation funding. So I think that's really worth pointing out. But no doubt, I mean, organizations like Ducks Unlimited have had huge impact for for wetlands specifically. So I think that's worth noting for sure. But it also doesn't look at the non-hunting related organizations that are also contributing to the funding as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand where you're coming from on that. I mean, we'll just have to agree to disagree. But I mean, I don't know, and it's not all about money either. A lot of people have put in volunteer hours to maintaining not just public lands but private. What is it called? Sanctuary. It's not a sanctuary, a refuge. Stuff like that. I mean, it's not all just hard cash and tax. A lot of us have put in a lot of effort into respecting the wildlife that we do hunt, because if it wasn't for those efforts, we wouldn't have them there at all. I don't just enjoy taking a life. I enjoy watching them in their habitat. I don't like the fact that there's so many subdivisions going up in our area and land, they don't make any more of it. So I'll continue to buy my tags to hopefully the state will increase WMA land so that people, not just hunters, can enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree.
But anyway, I got to get back in here.
Yeah, sounds like you got a busy evening. I appreciate you coming out.
All right, y'all have a good New Year.
You too.
All right, bye.
So that was a really good conversation. Yeah, I do hope you'll still consider some of the individuals though. Like I know, like ducks. I mean, I used to do a lot of duck hunting, but ducks like make breeding pairs. So if you take one duck, they're missing their spouse. Deer are herd animals as well. So if you take a deer, they're going to be missing from their herd. So empathizing with the individuals, I think, is key to a lot of the like changes we're seeing in ethics around conservation for like general population, but also for people like myself and others, who do want to make compassionate choices. But yeah, props to Reagan for coming up and having a chat.
She was lovely. She was lovely. Yeah, I guess I come from a different perspective. I guess I'm looking, I look, I worry to the amount that how, like she said, the wanton hunting that goes on needlessly, I think is a major concern. And it's sort of part and parcel for Americans just choosing violence across the board. This, it is unfair, I think, and I will give, credence to the conversation that, people who are sitting in the chat probably feel that we're judging, and it seems harsh, right? Like we're telling you that you are not good people. That's not the case. They're shitty vegans, right? We know that. So it depends, but character matters. The conditioning that we have, that the lies that we've been told as Americans about how we should be conducting ourselves, the hierarchies we give ourselves. Listen, across the board, it wasn't so long ago that white males thought that they were more intelligent than anything else on this planet. So it's an issue in terms of how do you recondition? How do you find new sources of entertainment? Because if hunting is an entertainment choice for you, that's very, very unfortunate, because we should be reading books more. We should be educating more. We should be enhancing other parts of who we are as human beings. So I am concerned in the totality of who are we as Americans? Are we just a violent society that this has now become entertainment for you? Yeah. That's where I find something's lacking, and it's so very sad to hear some of the people in the comments.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think it's worth noting too that like a lot of people grow up, like Reagan mentioned tradition, and I definitely understand that. Like for me, like my dad didn't grow up hunting, but he wanted that to be a tradition, that he passed down to us. So it is very much like a family bonding thing to get outdoors, but again, like it's not a necessary thing. And we do have some studies on the psychological impacts of having small children doing hunting. As well as studies about, other psychological issues from people who, take the lives of animals, both in butchers, but also in other mental health issues. So, those sorts of things are worth, looking into and considering, like whether that's a practice that we want to continue into the future, especially given the state of our biodiversity crisis and the dwindling wild spaces that we have. Do we really want to continue exploiting those, or do we want to preserve and protect them, enjoy them for the wild spaces they are, or do we want to, push ourselves into those spaces and extract from them, and exploit from them violently? So.
Yeah. I'm just staying on. I'm loving to listen because I'm learning a couple of things actually with a few of your guests, which has been very interesting. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but I am interested.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I only got time probably for one more guest. So I know we've got quite a few people in the guest queue, and I really appreciate y'all hanging out. And I hope y'all will come back and have chats with me. Again, I've only got time for one more person. So those of you that are in the request box, maybe you can throw in the chat a reason you'd like to come up and discuss. I really do appreciate y'all hanging out for so long.
Really fast.
Yeah,
just
please.
really fast. So the hunters, right? So Travis, right, with AR-15s. Okay, so this is what you chose to be for jest. You're trying to poke some holes in an argument. The real hunters in this chat, okay, when someone says, just like she just said, and the other caller before, we've only had hunters up here, shot 25 raccoons this week and threw them in a ditch. Overpopulation. So this is what I'm talking about. So the real hunters that say real hunters don't do that, why aren't you want to gain credence here, right? Like, why aren't you calling out the comments, other hunters? Or is it just that you're part of a group that you're afraid to sort of snitch on one another? So I'm not understanding, like, call out the hypocrite when you see it, but you don't. And that's, we could come to a better argument and consensus as human beings, as someone who possibly disagrees with you, if you would call out the BS when it comes up.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, Jackson, you've convinced me with your nonprofits and wetlands because I was a former duck hunter. I've actually traveled internationally for duck hunting. So I'm very experienced and pretty knowledgeable about, nonprofits for duck. So yeah, what's your argument, Jackson, for why you think hunting should be part of conservation? It looks like you left the app, so I can't hear you while you're not in the app.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, I had to pause my music. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good. I can hear you.
Okay. So as far as like the nonprofit organizations, as far as like the National Wild Turkey Federation, I consider myself a bird hunter, I guess you could say. I'm not a big game hunter as far as white-tailed deer or anything like that. So I can't speak on those, issues. But as far as like the organizations like the National Wild Turkey Federation, Ducks Unlimited, Delta Waterfowl, Quail Unlimited, all these great conservation groups that are largely hunter funded, I understand the fact that the U.S. government has really great programs set up as far as conservation goes. I just don't see how there could be a blurred line there between hunter conservation groups and U.S. government funded conservation groups. As far as conservation goes, I think conservation is conservation. However it comes from, wherever the money comes from, is conservation. Now, that's neither here nor there. But as far as you said, you were a waterfowl hunter. And,
so I would also have considered myself a bird hunter as well. I used to hunt ducks, doves, turkey, also did other small game as well for the first 26 years of my life. So yeah, mostly small game, but other game as well.
Okay, well, so are you aware of the snow goose conservation order and everything that's going on with the snow geese and everything, correct? Are you aware of that situation?
Not really. I've heard about it, but not super familiar with it.
Okay, well, I know you don't have a lot of time, but real quick, basically the general consensus of it is in the Mississippi Delta area where basically a large part of farming has come from, it has boosted the population of snow geese to the roof. And what's happening is the adult.
Sorry, Jackson. Sorry. When you say snow geese, do you mean like Canadian geese?
No. Like literally, the species of bird is actually called snow geese. There's snow geese, blue geese, which is like a color morph of them, and then there's also Ross's geese. But they call them the light goose conservation order. They're all under that same umbrella as what the U.S. government classifies them as far as a conservation order.
I see.
So back, before man touched the property in the Mississippi Delta area, it was all wooded, and then of course farming became a thing, and the population went through the roof because the wintering habitat was boosted substantially, so the population went through the roof. Well, what's happening is these geese are migrating to the tundra where they nest, and when the geese hatch, the young geese, the goslings, they nest in colonies, and the adult geese literally eat everything in sight, and there's nothing for the young geese to eat, and they eventually die of starvation. The young geese do, because they can't fly, they can't take care of themselves. So what ends up happening is there's no young geese. That's what they're worried about. There's no young geese to supplement the population. All you have is largely adults. So what they're worried about is the population is going to spike with nothing but adults. But when those adult birds start dying off, there's no young geese to replace the population. So the conservation order was put in place to, with no limits, unplug guns, kill as many geese as you want in the spring of the year, because they're worried that they want to take out the adult population of snow geese so the younger geese have a better survival rate. Now, that would be my push for hunting for conservation, because without hunting and trying to, take care of these birds, get rid of the adult birds, there will be no more young birds to, subsidize the population of birds that's coming in. And when the adult geese start dying, see what I'm saying? They're worried that the population is all of a sudden going to have a hard fall, is what they're worried about.
Yeah, I guess I would say what is the intention with that, right? It sounds like the interest is in preserving the species for further exploitation, though, right? For hunters to continue to enjoy, the game.
Not at all. It's more so to keep the species like the passenger pigeon. Everybody's aware of the overhunting of the passenger pigeon that completely killed them out. They're now extinct species. They're more so worried about the species just disappearing in general, because the species used to migrate to the Texas Gulf Coast and feed on the coastal marshes, and now they feed in the agricultural fields in the Mississippi Delta, which it made the wintering habitat go through the roof, where it made the survival rate go through the roof of the adult geese. And that's where they're worried about the young geese, being that they're literally eating everything. If you go up there and look at videos of they nest in colonies, the young geese are literally dying of starvation because there's so many adults that they eat everything in sight, and there's nothing for the young geese to eat. So that's what they're worried about, is the adult geese eventually, over time, age, they're eventually going to die. And without a young population of geese to take their place, they're worried the species is eventually going to drop off. So that's where the conservation order came into play, to try to take out the adult population of geese. And that would be my argument, where hunting is conservation to a point, because there's no other way to really take out this population of adult geese, because there's literally millions of them. If you look at these videos of snow geese in Arkansas and Missouri, there's literally fields of just white masses of thousands upon thousands and thousands of geese. And the population is through the roof. And it's all because of our doing, by increasing, the agriculture area back in the early 1900s. It's all our doing. The humankind caused it. And they're worried that with the damage that we've done by increasing the wintering habitat, eventually the species could kill itself off.
Yeah, so I appreciate you informing me on the snow geese. I'm not familiar with those. We have more Canadian geese over on the eastern coast that, have similar issues. Like a lot of people argue overpopulation, but they are a protected migratory bird. So there's no hunting of those. But yeah, I guess this kind of goes to the same points I've made on a lot of the different overpopulation stuff. And I realize, you've already pointed out, that agricultural land use is probably the main culprit for that. So, we could look at maybe how we can, approach it from a land use issue to help these populations. But typically, I would still argue that in these situations of overpopulation, there are alternatives to hunting for managing the population. Perhaps there's, some predator that's missing from the ecosystem that could help balance these populations, and have a healthy trophic system to help these, adult birds somehow, balance out more. But it at least historically, and I think humans are getting better at it because of technology and monitoring and things like that. But historically, when we get involved in species management, especially for the use or exploitation intentions for hunters, we typically make more of a mess within ecosystems, and we overlook a lot of the other species, right? So I don't know about the snow geese in particular. I'll definitely look into it, and I appreciate you bringing this up. But I would argue that there's still potential other alternatives that could look at the greater ecosystem, as well as the land use practices in these areas, and how we could address it from a more ethical way than unaliving these animals.
Well, they actually have looked into other ways of doing this. They thought about killing them from aerial. This is back in the 80s when the population was really going through the roof. They've thought about other ways to do this, but the problem is not only snow geese are using that area. All your other waterfowl, your ducks, all the other geese, speckle belly geese, your Canadian geese, all the mallards, gadwalls, all your other species of waterfowl are also using the same area, which populations are perfectly fine, in check, not hurt, not they're not in danger, but they don't need to be killed in mass by no means. So
Yeah.
it's really hard to target that one species without putting the rest of the birds that are controlled in danger. So
Yeah.
the only way to do that without doing that in mass is, humankind, like man caused it. Only a man can target, the certain species and try to control that population without, you see what I'm saying? Because you can try to do it in mass and try to take out some of the adult population geese, but they're a migratory bird. They travel across state lines. There's no way to really, pin them down, if you will. I mean, they're a bird. They migrate. So it's kind of hard to control that population. There really is no other alternative that no one can really think of to take out that adult population of geese versus hunting them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are alternatives, I'm sure. Again, I'll look into this specifically, but I know birds in specific, especially migratory birds, can be very tricky, especially like managing across like country borders. That gets even trickier, trying to figure out management plans and collaboration, like the treaties between Canada and Mexico and the U.S. For migratory birds can be really tricky, but I still do think that there are potential alternatives that maybe we, with newer technology, like targeted sterilization methods, again, like land management changes or how we're farming some of these areas could potentially be changed. Introduction of specific, either, I know it sounds scary, but introduction of potential predators, even if they're bacterial specific, not predators, but parasites or diseases that could, eventually impact. But a lot of times when we go in and manage these species, we're playing God in a sense, right? Like we're trying to say, well, this area should, have this certain level. And again, like you've already highlighted, that it is the land use in a lot of these situations. And for that's my whole argument for, the overpopulation of any species is that, our land management is impacting these species, right? So it's our land management that we should look for making changes to impact these species. And I think another part is like rewilding, and taking some of these lands, like maybe farmlands that are too close to lakes, might be higher target areas for these ducks or birds or geese, I guess. And changing those into forests, where there might be fox, habitat or coyote habitat. Could decrease those populations. Like I think there's a lot of different ways about going about it. And one thing, like you raised, like hunting is the best way to target these species. And in some ways, like I can understand your argument for that. But I also think that hunters make mistakes, right? Like we're human. So like a human trying to determine whether this is a certain bird versus another. It looks like maybe the male has like a different colored body and isn't fully white. Or maybe vice versa.
In geese, they're identical, same sex. Like it's impossible to tell a goose airborne until you get them in hand. Like a snow goose, their plumage is the exact same. With speckled-bellied geese, Canada geese, and even swans, all their plumages are the same. Only doves you can tell the difference between a male and a female airborne. But as far as when I was talking about the land being a bad thing for the snow geese, it actually became a good thing. I don't know if you remember back several years ago when BP had the oil spill in the coast. And where it became a great thing, private organizations like Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl actually paid these farmers to flood their fields and increase the habitat for the waterfowl so they would not migrate to the coast, bird species that did migrate to the coast, and try to prevent them from getting into the oil spill. And that was astronomically successful as far as, these conservation groups trying to keep birds from migrating down. And it was extremely successful. I mean, the bird populations were through the roof in that area because of these fields that normally were not flooded, all of a sudden had water because these farmers were pumping them with water and short-stopping all these birds and keeping them from migrating down there. So it's a double-edged sword. It did come great into conservation in one hand, but it's also hurting in the other hand. So,
So I guess, Jackson, my question to you to kind of get to the moral or ethical kind of conundrum that I like to kind of end on is, if we did have some non-lethal way to approach this, right? Whether it be with as some in the comments are highlighting, like playing God with sterilization, or if it came down to like rewilding and, returning some of these areas rather than being perfect, buffets for these geese. in agricultural use into like forestry use or something that could decrease the carrying capacity for these areas. If we found a solution like that and we determined that it was working, would you be for ending the hunting of these species if we knew that the populations were in flux and were in a good balance?
I would be down with absolutely ending the conservation order, because I would much rather see them in the conservation order as far as, us not being able to hunt them to that extent. Versus, I want to see the species flourish. Obviously, I care for these birds just as much as I enjoy hunting them. I do hunt them, I do eat them, I do enjoy waterfowl hunting, and I care for them just as much. If it came down to the conservation order ending, I would, if something happened and they found out the species was doing great and they ended the conservation order, I would be perfectly fine with that. That's great. But as far as waterfowl hunting as a whole, I want to keep that tradition as far as that goes. But I would be completely down with ending the conservation order if that's what if they determined that the species came down to that point where they imposed limits, they imposed no more electronic calls, all these different freedoms they basically give you during this conservation order. 100%, I would be down with giving it up.
I very much appreciate your honesty with that, because like I've had discussions like this, like about elk or other species, where people are arguing that, it's vital for overpopulation. And I propose that same hypothetical, right? Where if we had some non-interventionist approach like rewilding or, reintroducing predators or something like that, and the hunter, that I was debating would say, oh, well, I wouldn't support ending the hunting. And I'm like, okay, well, that kind of defeats your entire argument about you caring about conservation for hunting. So I very much appreciate, your consistency with that. But I would like to, point out that like, what you're doing is creating a victim. And that was something I overlooked too as a hunter. So I totally understand why you would do that and focus on like the benefits that you get from these creatures. But we are exploiting these wild animals, right? And if we have alternatives like plant-based alternatives, and we can, more efficiently grow crops and save farmland to rewild more and have more wild spaces, I think that would be a better move for conservation than continuing a tradition that's about exploiting wildlife. And I don't think that just because something is a tradition, is something that we necessarily can morally like justify. And I think we have an obligation each generation to analyze our culture and our traditions and determine whether something is moral and also whether it fits into the future going forward. And in my opinion, hunting really doesn't fit into the future for trying to conserve and protect wildlife, because it is a consumptive exploitation of wildlife.
Well, one last point I'll make up for it. I know you said you didn't have that much time. And as far as plant-based alternatives and being vegan and everything like that, I do understand why some people go that way. That's your God-given right. If you choose to eat only, plant-based things, that's on you. But as far as I'm concerned, humans as a species, but you don't get more basic nature than 2,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, whenever humans were living like nomads. And they actually naturally ate meat. That's why all the arrowheads are people find arrowheads every day from thousands of years ago. In my personal opinion, humans were carnivores. That's why we naturally made arrowheads. That's why we naturally consume meat. That's my personal opinion, and I will continue to consume meat. That's at me as a human. That's what I feel like I was born to eat. I mean, humans did that thousands of years ago. That at their basic natural point. And
I do want to end on a good note with you, Jackson, and I try not to platform like disinformation, and you're kind of making a claim that has been proven false. Like humans were not carnivores. Humans are opportunistic omnivores, right? And like us creating spear points and weapons and tools was a survival mechanism, right? And so we could justify all sorts of like really bad things because it was something we needed to do for survival. So I don't think that that's a valid claim. And also to claim that we were carnivores is just factually incorrect. We are great apes. Like I said, we're opportunistic omnivores, so we eat primarily plants. But when we were in survival situations, we sought out game that we could, use tools to unalive. Carnivores rely on, their nature and their instinct to unalive animals, not tools. So we as humans developed brains from the consumption or larger brains from the consumption of cooked calories from like tubers. We have archaeological evidence of this from, teeth of ancient hominids to show that we were primarily eating plant-based diets historically. So, I don't want to end on a note where you're like making
Oh
claims on
no,
the line.
absolutely not. I understand. Sorry to interrupt you. I understand. I get it completely. I enjoy salad just like the next guy. I mean, I do eat both, and I do believe we were omnivores. I'm sorry to say carnivore. That was a bad choice of words, but we did consume meat, and that's where, as we're opportunistic, you said our diets, were largely plant based. I feel like at our basic natural, state was back when we were, 10,000 years ago when we were trying to survive. And if consuming meat was survival, I feel like it would be the same as now. We can naturally digest meat. We can naturally eat meat. It's just I agree to disagree on that point, I guess. You can't argue that we did develop points and it was in our natural instincts to consume meat. So it is opportunistic, but we still, at our basic natural point, we did consume meat because that was survival, and we can digest meat. So
I would like to point out, like, most of us aren't in survival situations, right? And, like, most of us are going to the store to get most of our calories from the grocery store. Is it safe to say that you also, Jackson, is it safe to say that you also still, like, purchase meat products from the grocery stores or when you're out at restaurants?
Well, yes, because you can't actually go out and shoot chickens. And I do enjoy chickens.
You could raise them, but I would encourage you not to. But yeah, so like, this is another thing I like to point out. You obviously like have a lot of care for wildlife and wild spaces, but I think you are overlooking the individuals that you're exploiting. And again, like, I understand that perspective. Like, I was there for most of my life, but it is worth pointing out. If you care about land use, and continuing to preserve and conserve wild spaces, we need to look at our agricultural land use. And the facts are that the majority of cropland, over 80%, is devoted towards animal agriculture, both in pasture, for grass-fed animals that we're cutting hay for the winter and grazing them on, as well as growing grain crops for the majority of animals that are in factory farms or CAFOs. So if we care about saving land and also rewilding and saving wild spaces, we need to look at our consumptive behaviors, not just in hunting, but also on our diet. And if we are consuming animal products, we're having a larger impact on the environment, and we're demanding more land use from an agricultural perspective. So I really encourage people who care about conservation, to look into this fact, look into the facts about agriculture. I know, like, you seem really focused on the history of humans like consuming meat, but I would also encourage you to look into the benefits of a plant-based diet and the health outcomes compared to like a good, healthy meat inclusive diet versus a plant-based and fully vegan diet. There are health benefits as well as the environmental impacts. So I would really encourage you as a conservationist, somebody who cares about wildlife, to look into these facts and kind of seek understanding there.
All right. Well, like I said, I agree to disagree on some points. I do agree with you on some points, but I definitely appreciate the time. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah.
Lovely conversation.
Likewise, Jackson. Yeah.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming up. Cool. I think that's going to do it for today. I really appreciate you coming up and helping. It's always nice to have.
I learned a couple of things, and it was very interesting. And just when I thank you, Ben. You did a beautiful job. And not only that, you were just genuinely kind and mindful and thought about everything before you spoke. Unfortunately, not like some of the comments that were in your feed today. So more power to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I appreciate everybody hanging out. I know a lot of the vegan friends have been here, and I know some of you hunters have been waiting in the queue. So I'm really apologize. I wish I had all day and could do this all day. But it's just not a possibility right now. So got to get cooking and making some dinner and hanging out with the wife for the evening. So really appreciate everybody hanging out. Thank you again for coming up. And yeah, we'll see you all again next time. See ya.